The heat of the Afghan sun wasn't like the dry, baking warmth of a Montana summer. It was a physical weight, a heavy, suffocating blanket that smelled of ancient dust, spent cordite, and the metallic tang of blood. Sarah Mitchell felt it pressing against her neck as she dragged a heavy wooden crate of 5.56 ammunition across the uneven sand of the compound. Every muscle in her 24-year-old body screamed in protest. Her lungs felt like they were lined with sandpaper, and the salt from her own sweat burned her eyes, blurring her vision until the world was nothing but a haze of tan and gray. At 5'3", she was a logistics specialist, a person who spent her days counting inventory and filling out requisitions. She was the girl who ensured the warriors had what they needed to fight, never imagining that the fight would find her. High on a jagged ridge 200 yards away, a Taliban fighter adjusted the dial on his telescopic sight. To him, Sarah was an easy mark, a small, struggling figure in the middle of a chaotic battlefield. He watched her through the crosshairs, his finger curling slowly around the trigger of his rifle. He could see the strain in her shoulders, the way she paused to wipe her forehead, oblivious to the fact that her life was seconds away from ending. He smiled, a cold, predatory expression. He wasn't just going to kill an American, he was going to kill the one person keeping the ammunition flowing to the men who were currently pinning his brothers down. He began the final squeeze of the trigger, his breath held still. A crack like a whip snapped through the air, but it didn't come from the ridge. Sarah didn't even hear it over the roar of her own pulse, but she felt the sudden, violent shift in the air. On the ridge, the insurgent's head snapped back with a gruesome finality. He slumped over the rocks, his rifle sliding uselessly into the dirt. Sarah gasped, dropping the heavy crate as she looked up toward the northern perimeter. There, perched atop a crumbling mud wall, Lieutenant Marcus Hayes was already cycling the bolt on his sniper rifle. A thin wisp of smoke curled from the end of his barrel, dancing in the shimmering heat. He didn't look at her. He didn't offer a thumbs up or a reassuring nod. His eyes remained glued to the scope, scanning the horizon for the next shadow that dared to move. That was the fourth time in a single month that Hayes had saved Sarah's life without her ever knowing the depth of the danger she'd been in. To him, she was a vital asset that needed protection. To her, he was a silent guardian from a world of elite soldiers she didn't belong to. But the gears of fate were turning in ways neither of them could foresee. Before the sun set on this valley, the roles would reverse. The logistics specialist from Billings would find herself holding the line when the legends of the special forces were falling. It was a transformation that had been brewing since the day Sarah realized that life doesn't ask for permission before it takes everything you love. Sarah never had any intention of wearing a uniform. Back in Montana, her dreams were rooted in the soil of the Gallatin Valley. She wanted to be a teacher, perhaps middle school history, so she could tell stories of how the world became what it was. She pictured herself working summers at her father's hardware store in Billings, a place that smelled of cedar shavings and motor oil. She was supposed to marry Tommy Reeves, a boy she'd known since the 3rd grade who looked at her like she was the only light in the world. They were going to have 3 kids and a house with a porch that faced the mountains. It was a simple life, a safe life, the kind of life everyone in a small town expects you to lead. The universe, however, had other plans. 2 weeks before high school graduation, Tommy's truck hit a patch of black ice on a lonely stretch of highway. Just like that, the future Sarah had built in her mind evaporated like morning mist. There was no graduation party, no wedding, no house on the hill. There was only a cold, quiet cemetery and a silence in her childhood bedroom that felt like a physical scream. One night, months later, unable to sleep and unable to breathe in a town that felt like a tomb, Sarah found herself at a strip mall recruitment office. She'd grabbed a handful of posters on impulse, and at 3 a.m, she was staring at them in the moonlight, seeing a version of herself that didn't know how to hurt. Her mother found her there at dawn, sitting on the edge of the bed with a brochure for the army in her hand. Her mother's face was etched with a mixture of fear and understanding. She told Sarah that she didn't have to run away from the pain, that she didn't have to flee her home just to forget. But Sarah's voice, cracked and hollow, told a different story. She wasn't running away, she was running towards something. She needed to do something that mattered, something Tommy would have been proud of. When her mother argued that Tommy loved her exactly as she was, Sarah could only whisper that she didn't know who that person was anymore. The girl who loved Tommy was gone, buried in the same soil as him. 6 months later, Sarah was standing in the brutal, unforgiving heat of Fort Bliss, Texas. The transition was a shock to the system. Instead of lesson plans, she was memorizing technical manuals for ammunition calibers and transport weights. The drill sergeants took one look at her stature and dubbed her short stack. It was meant to be an insult, a way to grind her down, but Sarah took it with the same stoic grace she used when fixing tractors back home. The other soldiers called her Montana because she still spoke with a gentle, rural cadence and drank coffee so black it looked like crude oil. She didn't complain when the rucksacks felt like they were crushing her spine. She just kept walking, her jaw set, her mind focused on the numbers. Despite her efficiency in the warehouse, Sarah felt a growing restlessness. At night, when the barracks were filled with the sounds of snoring and the soft glow of phones as soldiers messaged their families, Sarah went to the shooting range. It started because of Corporal Jensen, a grisly supply sergeant who looked like he'd been carved out of a piece of old hickory. He told her that everyone in a combat zone should know how to shoot, even the people who spent their days counting socks. He didn't expect her to take it to heart, but Sarah began checking out an M4 carbine every evening after mess. She would stand on the firing line until the desert stars came out, bright and cold against the black velvet sky. Her shoulders would ache from the recoil, and her ears would ring despite the plugs, but she didn't stop. She found a strange, meditative peace in the rhythm of it. Aim, breathe, squeeze, reset. It was a world of precision where she was in control. One night, Jensen appeared out of the shadows, watching her as she put a tight group of rounds into the center of a silhouette target at 100 yards. He noticed the way she didn't fight the rifle, the way she seemed to merge with the weapon until it was an extension of her own body. Jensen sat down beside her, his face illuminated by the pale moonlight. He asked her what she was preparing for, noticing that she was out there 6 nights a week while everyone else was relaxing. Sarah didn't answer immediately. She performed a perfect clear-and-safe on her rifle, her father's voice echoing in her head about the respect due to any tool capable of taking a life. She told Jensen that her whole life, people had defined her by her size and her softness. They told her what she couldn't do. When Tommy died, she realized they were right. She couldn't save him, and she couldn't save herself from the expectations of others. She wasn't there to prove them wrong. She was there to prove to herself that she was more than just a girl who carried things for people who actually mattered. The corporal didn't dismiss her words. Instead, he reached into a heavy drag bag he'd brought with him and pulled out a bolt-action sniper rifle. It was a beast of a weapon, longer and heavier than anything Sarah had ever touched, with a scope that seemed to drink in the starlight. He asked if she'd ever fired one. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs as she looked at the concentrated thunder in his hands. She told him she wasn't qualified, but Jensen didn't care about paperwork. He handed her the rifle, telling her it was time for her to see what she was really capable of, just in case the world ever asked more of her than a logistics manifest. The first few shots were a disaster. The rifle was too long for her arms, the magnification was disorienting, and the recoil felt like a punch from a heavyweight boxer. She missed the targets completely, the rounds kicking up dust far in the distance. Jensen leaned in, his voice a low, steady rumble. He told her to stop trying to muscle the machine. He told her to find the space between her heartbeats, that microscopic gap of absolute stillness where the shot truly lived. Sarah closed her eyes for a moment, letting the desert wind cool her face. She opened them, focused on her pulse, and waited. Thump, space, thump, space, she squeezed. The steel target at 300 yards let out a satisfying metallic ring. Jensen's eyebrows shot up. He told her to do it again. By the time the moon had crossed the midpoint of the sky, Sarah had put 15 rounds into a grouping so tight it could be covered by a single playing card. Jensen stared at the target as if it were a miracle. He trained hundreds of soldiers, most of whom couldn't achieve that level of precision after months of specialized schooling. Sarah had done it in a single night. He told her the Army needed to know about this talent, that she should be moved to a sniper element. Sarah's refusal was sharp and immediate. She didn't want to be special. She didn't want to be moved to a unit where she didn't belong. She had joined the logistics corps to be useful, to be the person who ensured the real fighters had what they needed. She believed that she saved lives by making sure every magazine was full and every crate arrived on time. She handed the rifle back to Jensen, her expression final. She was Montana, the girl who stacked hay and counted bullets. That was who she was, and that was all she wanted to be. Jensen saw the stubbornness in her eyes, but he also saw the hidden fire. He made her promise that if the day ever came when being a logistics specialist wasn't enough, she wouldn't hesitate. She wouldn't doubt the gift she had. Sarah promised, thinking the situation was entirely impossible. A few months later, the news hit the unit like a physical blow. Corporal Jensen had been killed by an IED near Kandahar. His last words, passed through a medic, were a request to tell Montana that he was proud of her. The loss tore a hole in Sarah's heart, a familiar ache she thought she'd left behind in the Montana snow. Jensen's rifle, the one they'd shared that night at Fort Bliss, was sent back to a Navy SEAL armory. Sarah threw herself into her work, her error rate dropping to absolute zero. She became a machine, a ghost in the warehouse who spoke only in inventory numbers and shipping dates. She was preparing for Operation Steel Thunder, though she didn't know it yet. Steel Thunder was a high-stakes mission involving 12 Navy SEALs tasked with taking down a high-value target in a remote valley. Sarah sat in the logistics office, triple-checking the manifests for the mission. She loaded magazines with a mechanical, obsessive precision, testing every spring and inspecting every casing for the slightest defect. Her sergeant, a man named Ramirez, teased her about being slow, but he didn't stop her. He knew that when Sarah Mitchell packed a crate, nothing failed. She watched the Chinook helicopter lift off from the pad, carrying those 12 men and the thousands of rounds she'd personally inspected. As the bird disappeared into the shimmering morning haze, a cold chill settled in her bones. It was the same feeling she'd had the night Tommy didn't come home. The call came 3 hours later. The mission had gone sideways. The SEALs were pinned down in a crumbling compound, surrounded by a force much larger than intelligence had suggested. They were taking heavy fire, they had casualties, and they were running out of ammunition. The enemy had anti-air capabilities, meaning no more helicopters could get close without being blown out of the sky. The only option was a ground convoy, a desperate dash through hostile territory to resupply the men before they were overrun. Major Patterson stood before the assembled logistics team, his face a mask of grim determination. He asked for volunteers for the drive, knowing full well it might be a one-way trip. Sarah's hand was the first to go up. She didn't even think about it. Those men had her bullets, and if they ran out, their deaths would be on her conscience. She had 20 minutes to pack. She moved with a speed that blurred the edges of her vision, loading crates into the back of a transport truck with a strength she didn't know she possessed. She wasn't a combat soldier, but she was a specialist who knew how to keep a line moving. As she climbed into the truck, Lieutenant Hayes appeared at her side. He looked at her with a piercing intensity, recognizing the girl from the range. He handed her a sidearm, a heavy pistol that felt like a lead weight in her hand. He told her that if things went wrong, she was to keep shooting until the threat was down. He reminded her that out there, logistics didn't matter, only survival did. The convoy rolled out into the wasteland, a line of 4 vehicles kicking up a massive plume of dust. The landscape was beautiful in a terrifying way, a jagged expanse of rock and sand that seemed to hide 1,000 eyes. 20 minutes into the journey, the world turned into fire. The lead Humvee hit a massive IED, the explosion lifting the multi-ton vehicle into the air like it was a toy. Smoke and screams filled the air as gunfire erupted from the ridges on both sides of the road. Bullets punched through the metal of Sarah's truck, the sound like hammers hitting a tin roof. Sarah threw herself flat against the floorboards as her sergeant, Ramirez, screamed for her to take the wheel. The driver of her truck had been slumped over, a jagged piece of shrapnel in his throat. Sarah crawled over him, her hands slick with blood, and grabbed the steering wheel. She didn't think about the terror clawing at her throat. She didn't think about the Montana mountains or the teacher she'd wanted to be. She thought about the 12 men waiting for her. She slammed the truck into gear and floored it, driving through the wall of smoke and fire. Bullets shattered the windshield, showering her in glass, but she didn't stop. She drove like she was back on the farm, navigating a broken tractor through a storm. They broke through the ambush, leaving half their convoy burning behind them. By the time they reached the compound where the SEALs were trapped, the truck was barely holding together. The compound was a nightmare of rubble and smoke. Dead bodies lay in the dirt, and the air was thick with the smell of sulfur. Sarah jumped out of the truck before it had even fully stopped, dragging crates of ammunition toward the men who were desperately firing from behind crumbling walls. She saw the exhaustion in their eyes, the grim realization that they were fighting a losing battle. She found Hayes near the center of the compound. He was barking orders, his face covered in soot, but even he looked rattled. He took a crate from her, his hands trembling slightly. He told her she'd done well, that she'd saved them. But as he turned to return to his position, a heavy machine gun opened up from the ridge. The bullets tore through the air with a terrifying thudding sound. Hayes was hit, 2 rounds slamming into his chest, throwing him backward into the dirt. A cry went up, "Sniper down." The compound's primary marksman was out, and the insurgents on the ridge were already moving in for the kill. The battlefield went strangely quiet in Sarah's mind. She looked at Hayes, lying in the dust, his blood pooling beneath him. She looked at his rifle, the long, black weapon lying just out of his reach. It was the same model Jensen had taught her to fire at Fort Bliss. Without a word, Sarah Mitchell, the logistics specialist who had never fired a shot in anger, crawled through the dirt and picked up the rifle. It felt heavier than she remembered, cold and heavy with the weight of responsibility. She positioned herself behind a low mud wall, adjusted the bipod, and looked through the scope. The world zoomed in. She saw the insurgents moving through the rocks, their faces clear and determined. They were laughing, confident that the Americans were broken. Sarah took a deep breath, feeling the air fill her lungs. She found the rhythm of her heart. Thump, space, thump, space. She squeezed the trigger. The rifle kicked against her shoulder, a familiar, violent jolt. On the ridge, the lead insurgent fell, his body tumbling down the slope. The Taliban froze, confused by the sudden, accurate fire coming from a compound they thought was neutralized. From inside the compound, Ramirez and the surviving SEALs watched in stunned silence as the small woman from Montana began systematically picking off the attackers. She moved with a cold, mechanical precision, her eyes never leaving the glass. She wasn't Sarah the warehouse worker anymore. She was a force of nature, a girl who had been forged in grief and trained in secret, finally doing what she was born to do. Every time an insurgent tried to raise an RPG or set up a machine gun, Sarah's rifle barked, and the threat vanished. The insurgents began to retreat, their morale shattered by the invisible death coming from the ruins. Sarah didn't stop until the ridges were empty, and the only sound left was the whistling of the wind through the rocks. She remained behind the rifle for a long time, her finger still on the trigger, her body trembling with the aftershocks of adrenaline. It was only when Ramirez placed a hand on her shoulder that she let go. She looked at him, her eyes wide and wet with tears she hadn't realized she was crying. She asked if Hayes was okay. The medic had managed to stabilize the lieutenant, thanks in large part to the time Sarah had bought them. As they loaded Hayes onto a medical evacuation helicopter that had finally managed to break through, he reached out and grabbed Sarah's hand. He didn't say much. He just whispered Montana and gave her a weak, bloody smile. He knew, and she knew, that the lines between logistics and combat had been blurred forever. Sarah Mitchell had come to Afghanistan to be useful, but she ended up becoming a legend. Weeks later, back at the base, Sarah sat on the edge of her cot, staring at a letter from her father. He talked about the hardware store and the first snow of the season. She looked at her hands, the hands that had counted thousands of bullets and then used them to save lives. She realized that she would never be the teacher she'd planned to be. That girl had died with Tommy. But the woman who remained was something more. She was a protector, a person who knew that the most important thing you can carry isn't a rucksack or a manifest. It's the courage to do what's necessary when the world falls apart. She walked out to the range that evening, the desert air cool and familiar. She didn't go to practice her marksmanship. She went to say goodbye to the ghost of Corporal Jensen and the memory of the girl she used to be. As she stood under the vast, starlit sky, she felt a sense of peace. She was a logistics specialist, yes. She was short stack. She was Montana. But more than that, she was a soldier who had held the line. And as she looked out over the horizon, she knew that whatever happened next, she was ready. Just in case. The legend of Sarah Mitchell spread through the ranks like wildfire. They told stories of the tiny woman who drove a burning truck through an ambush and then picked up a sniper rifle to save a team of elite warriors. Some called it luck, others called it a miracle. But those who knew her, those who had seen her at the range or in the warehouse, knew better. They knew it was the result of a quiet, relentless determination to be more than what the world expected. Sarah didn't care about the stories. She went back to her warehouse, back to her inventory and her manifests. She still drank her coffee black and still said "you betcha" to anyone who asked how she was doing. But now, whenever she walked past the barracks or the mess hall, The toughest men in the army stepped aside to let her pass, their eyes filled with a respect that no rank or medal could ever buy. The hardware store in Billings was still there, and the mountains of Montana still stood tall and unchanging. Sarah knew she would see them again one day, but for now there were crates to be filled, magazines to be tested, and a line that needed to be held. She picked up her clipboard, her movements steady and sure. In the distance, the sound of a helicopter echoed through the valley, a reminder of the world outside the wire. Sarah Mitchell didn't look up. She had work to do, and as she'd proven to everyone, and most importantly to herself, she was exactly where she was meant to be. The quiet of the afternoon in the warehouse was broken only by the scratching of her pen against the paper. Each entry was a promise, each number a shield. She thought of Tommy, not with the crushing weight of grief, but with a gentle, lingering warmth. She had done something that mattered. She had become someone he would have been proud of. And as the sun began to set, casting long, golden shadows across the floor, Sarah Mitchell smiled. It wasn't the smile of a girl who had forgotten her past, but the smile of a woman who had finally found her future in the most unlikely of places. The war was far from over, and the desert was still a dangerous, unpredictable place, but Montana was ready. She was always ready. As she closed the heavy metal doors of the warehouse for the night, the sound echoed through the base, a solid, final thud. It was the sound of a job well done. It was the sound of a life reclaimed. Sarah walked back toward the barracks, her head held high, the stars of the Afghan sky mirroring the stars she had once watched over the Montana prairie. She was a long way from home, but in that moment, for the first time in years, she felt like she finally belonged. The logistics of her life had finally balanced out, and the result was a strength that would never be broken. The girl from Billings had become the woman of the line, and the world was a safer place because of it. The desert sun was no longer just a celestial body. It had become a physical weight, pressing down on Sarah Mitchell's shoulders as she lay in the bed of the scorched transport truck. The metal beneath her was a searing griddle, radiating a heat that soaked through her fatigues and turned her sweat into a stinging film over her eyes. Every breath she took tasted of fine, alkaline dust and the acrid metallic tang of spent brass. She adjusted her grip on the heavy rifle, her fingers slick against the stock. Through the high-powered scope, the world was a shimmering, distorted landscape of ochre rocks and long, jagged shadows. She saw a shape move, a flash of dark fabric between two boulders, and she didn't think. She simply exhaled, felt the rhythm of her heart, and squeezed. The rifle kicked hard into her shoulder, a familiar, punishing bruise already forming, and the figure in the distance dropped mid-stride, disappearing into the jagged terrain like a ghost. A few yards away, another fighter was frantically trying to set up a machine gun tripod, his movements hurried and desperate. Sarah adjusted her aim, leading the target by a fraction of an inch to account for the wind whistling through the canyon. She squeezed again. The round found its mark, punching through the man's shoulder and sending him spinning backward before he could chamber a single round. The sudden, lethal precision of her fire had an immediate effect on the remaining attackers. The aggressive push faltered. They went to ground, diving behind cover with a newfound caution. They had realized with bloody clarity that someone on the American side knew how to do more than just suppress a position. Someone was hunting them. "Mitchell, we've got movement on the north side," a voice croaked from below. Sarah glanced down, her vision momentarily blurring as she broke her focus on the scope. A SEAL she didn't recognize was leaning against the side of the truck. He couldn't have been more than 25, his face a mask of grime and dried blood, but his eyes were ancient. A makeshift bandage was tied around his upper arm, already soaked through with a deep, alarming crimson. "3 targets are trying to flank through that dried riverbed," he gasped, pointing toward a jagged scar in the earth that wound around their perimeter. Sarah swung the rifle, the heavy barrel pivoting smoothly. She found the riverbed through the optics, scanning the labyrinth of bleached stones and low scrub. It looked empty. The silence that followed was more unnerving than the roar of the gunfire. Nothing moved. No muzzle flashes, no shifting shadows. "I don't see them," she whispered, more to herself than the soldier below. The answer came in the form of a rhythmic hammering. Bullets punched through the side of the truck, the impact sending vibrations through the floorboards that Sarah felt in her teeth. One round whistled inches from her head, sparking off the metal rim of the truck bed. She didn't scream. There wasn't time. She rolled to her left, her movements instinctive and jagged, and brought the rifle up in one fluid motion. She caught a glimpse of a muzzle flash from the edge of the wash and fired twice in rapid succession. A high, thin scream echoed across the desert, followed by a silence that felt heavy and final. "One down," the SEAL shouted, his voice cracking with the strain of the fight. Two still moving. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. Back at the practice range in Montana, the paper targets never bled, and they certainly never shot back. She hadn't been prepared for the weight of it, the split-second chasm between life and death, and the soul-crushing realization that every missed shot wasn't just a point lost on a scorecard. It was a life lost among her friends. She saw a flicker of movement in the riverbed again, a tan shoulder, the glint of a rifle barrel, but it was gone before she could even center the crosshairs. "They're smart," she muttered, her breath hitching in her chest. "They're Taliban," the SEAL replied, his voice grimmer now. "They've been doing this since before you were born, kid. You need help up there?" "I need them to make a mistake," Sarah said, her jaw tightening. The SEAL let out a breath that was half laugh, half wheeze. "Yeah, and they need us to run out of bullets first. I guess we'll see who gets what they need before the sun goes down." Sarah refused to look away from the scope. She kept her eye pressed to the rubber guard, waiting for the smallest deviation in the landscape. Her shoulder was a dull, throbbing ache from the rifle's relentless recoil, and the sweat was beginning to blur her vision again. The truck bed had become an oven, the heat radiating off the metal in waves that made the horizon dance. But she remained motionless. She knew that the second she lost focus, the second her eyelids flickered, that was the moment they would rush. A rock skittered in the riverbed to her left. It was a sharp, distinct sound, but it felt wrong. It was too obvious. A distraction. Trusting a gut instinct she didn't know she possessed, she swung the rifle to the right, away from the sound. Just as the barrel settled, a fighter popped up from a different position entirely. He had an RPG perched on his shoulder, the bulbous warhead aimed straight at the heart of the compound where the wounded were being held. Sarah didn't hesitate. She squeezed the trigger. The fighter collapsed backward as if his legs had been cut from under him, the RPG sliding from his lifeless grip and thudding into the sand, unfired. "Good shot," the SEAL screamed from below, his voice filled with a desperate kind of triumph. "That's two. Where's the third?" Sarah searched the terrain, her breathing coming in harsh, ragged gulps. The scope showed her nothing but the indifferent beauty of the desert, shifting sands, heat shimmers, and the jagged teeth of distant mountains. There was no human shape, no movement. The third fighter had vanished, seemingly swallowed by the earth itself. He was either dead or smart enough to realize the odds had shifted against him. "I lost him," she said, her voice trembling. "Then he's probably running," the SEAL said, leaning his head back against the truck. "They don't like losing people to snipers. It makes them nervous. It gets inside their heads." "Good," Sarah whispered. "They should be nervous." The SEAL laughed, a sharp, almost manic sound that cut through the tension. "Holy hell, Montana. Where did a logistics specialist learn to shoot like that?" "Nighttime practice range," Sarah replied, her eyes still scanning the horizon. "Corporal Jensen taught me the basics." "Jensen? From 3rd Logistics, that Jensen?" "Yeah, you knew him." The SEAL's face went dark, the momentary light in his eyes extinguished. "He trained my spotter before Kandahar, saved my life twice in the green zone. He was a good man. I heard he didn't make it back. IED hit his Humvee about 3 months ago." Sarah felt a cold lump form in her throat. "Damn," she whispered. The SEAL shook his head, looking up at her with an expression that bordered on wonder. "He'd be proud of you right now, Mitchell. You know that, right? You're doing him justice out here." Sarah didn't answer. Her throat was too tight, and her eyes were burning with more than just sweat and dust. She couldn't afford to cry, not here, not when the lives of the men around her depended on her ability to see through a glass lens and keep her hands steady. She needed to be the wall between them and the dark. "What's your name?" she asked, her voice cracking as she tried to change the subject. "Petty Officer Jake Morrison," he replied, "but everyone just calls me Reaper." "That's a terrible nickname," Sarah said, a small, involuntary smile touching her lips. Morrison grinned through the grime and the blood matting his beard. "Says the girl who just dropped 5 targets in 3 minutes. What do they call you, Montana?" "Sarah. Just Sarah." "Well, just Sarah," Morrison said, his expression sobering. "How much ammo you got left?" She quickly checked the heavy magazines lined up beside her. 93 rounds, she reported, and we're still surrounded by at least 20 hostiles who very much want us to stop breathing. "You any good at math? Good enough to know those numbers don't work in our favor," she said. "Yeah," Morrison's grin faded entirely. "That's what I figured, too." Inside the compound, a piercing scream tore through the air. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated agony. It might have been Hayes, or perhaps one of the other wounded soldiers they had dragged from the wreckage of the convoy. The sound cut through Sarah like shards of broken glass, a brutal reminder of why she was perched in this metal oven, why she had volunteered for a mission that was never supposed to be hers. She couldn't afford to fail. Failure meant more of those screams. "How long until extraction?" she asked, her voice tight. "Apaches are inbound," Morrison said, checking his watch with his good hand. "But they are at least 20 minutes out. Maybe more if they run into resistance on the way over the ridge." 20 minutes is an eternity in a firefight, Sarah said. "You're learning fast," Morrison replied. He started to push himself off the truck, moving toward the compound entrance, then paused. "Listen, Sarah, what you're doing up here, holding this position alone, keeping them at range, that's the only reason we haven't been overrun already. Hayes was our guardian angel for the first hour. Now it's you. So whatever happens, you keep shooting. Don't think about the logistics. Don't think about the paperwork. Don't think about anything except keeping us alive. Can you do that?" Sarah looked down at him. He was a warrior, a man who had likely never known the kind of paralyzing fear she was feeling, yet here he was, bleeding and desperate, asking a supply clerk to be his salvation. "I can do that," she said, her voice finding a sudden, unexpected strength. "Good girl. Now excuse me while I go stop our lieutenant from bleeding out." Morrison disappeared into the shadows of the compound, leaving Sarah alone once more. The silence of the desert felt predatory. She knew they were out there, watching, waiting for her to blink. She didn't have to wait long for the next move. The attack didn't come as a trickle this time, it came as a flood. It was a coordinated push from 3 directions at once, a tactic that spoke of seasoned leaders who were tired of being held at bay by a single rifle. Sarah saw them through the scope, a wave of fighters breaking cover and sprinting forward. They weren't hiding anymore. They were firing as they ran, their voices carrying across the sand in a chaotic mix of prayers and war cries. Sarah began to shoot. Her first magazine was empty in 20 seconds, the hot brass clinking against the truck bed like falling coins. She slammed the second magazine home and was firing before the bolt had even finished locking back. There were targets everywhere, too many to track, too many to stop. She felt the desperation of it, the overwhelming weight of the numbers. She couldn't get them all, but she could make them pay for every inch of sand they claimed. A fighter went down clutching his shattered leg. Another spun sideways, his rifle flying into the air as he collapsed. A third dropped face first into the dirt and didn't move. Behind her, the remaining SEALs opened up from the compound walls, their heavy machine guns joining her rifle in a frantic, deafening symphony of violence. Bullets crossed in the air like deadly, invisible fireflies. Explosions from hand grenades shook the ground, sending plumes of dust into the air. The smoke began to fill Sarah's lungs, stinging her eyes, but she refused to stop. Stopping meant dying. "They're breaking through on the east wall," Ramirez's voice screamed over the radio, raw with panic. Sarah swung her rifle toward the east, her heart leaping into her throat. She saw 3 fighters scrambling over the rubble of a collapsed section of the wall. They were almost inside. They were too close for her long-range rifle, and the men inside were too focused on the frontal assault to stop them before they reached the infirmary. She didn't think. She dropped the rifle, grabbed the heavy semi-automatic pistol Hayes had pressed into her hand earlier, and jumped from the truck. The fall was 8 feet straight down onto hard-packed dirt and jagged rocks. It should have shattered her ankles, but the adrenaline coursing through her veins was a potent anesthetic. She landed hard, rolled, and was up and running before her brain could register the impact. She sprinted toward the east wall, the pistol extended, closing the distance with a reckless speed that bypassed all logic. The first fighter saw her and began to swing his AK-47 around. Sarah didn't give him the chance. She squeezed the trigger twice, the rounds catching him square in the chest and knocking him backward off the rubble. The second fighter was already firing, his bullets kicking up geysers of dirt at her feet. Sarah dove behind a pile of debris, rolled through the dust, and came up shooting. Her first round went wide, skipping off a stone, but her second caught him in the shoulder, spinning him around. The third round put him down for good. The third fighter was different. He was smarter, or perhaps just more desperate. He had grabbed a wounded SEAL, Rodriguez, Sarah remembered the name from the morning's supply manifest, and was holding him as a human shield. He was screaming something in a language Sarah didn't understand, his face contorted with rage as he pressed a jagged knife to Rodriguez's throat. Sarah pulled up short, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Her hands were shaking so violently she could barely keep the pistol leveled. Rodriguez was looking at her, his eyes wide with a terrifying mixture of pain and pleading. The fighter was grinning, his teeth yellow and jagged because he knew she wouldn't shoot. He knew the risk of hitting the hostage was too high. Sarah Rodriguez's voice was a barely audible whisper, thick with blood. "Do it." "I can't," she breathed, her vision swimming. "You can," he hissed. "You have to. He's going to kill me anyway. If you don't shoot, he kills me, and then he kills every single person in that room. You aim for his head and you don't miss. Do it right now." The fighter pressed the knife deeper, a thin line of crimson trickling down Rodriguez's neck. Sarah felt a strange, cold calm wash over her. The shaking in her hands didn't stop, but it became manageable. The entire world narrowed down to a single point, the sight picture of the pistol and the few inches of the fighter's head visible above Rodriguez's shoulder. It was one shot. There would be no second chances, no margin for error. She breathed out, finding the space between heartbeats. She fired. The fighter's head snapped back, his grip on Rodriguez loosening instantly as he collapsed into the dust. The knife fell harmlessly to the ground. Rodriguez dropped to his knees, gasping for air, his hands flying to the cut on his neck as if he couldn't believe he was still alive. "Holy Mother of, how did you?" "That was impossible," he wheezed. Sarah didn't answer. She couldn't. She turned away and began to vomit violently behind the pile of rubble. Her body was finally catching up to the horror of what she had done. The adrenaline was fading, replaced by a crushing weight of intimacy with death. She had taken lives with her own hands at close range, and the reality of it was more than she could bear. Ramirez found her 30 seconds later, still heaving, tears carving tracks through the grime on her face. Mitchell, look at me." She looked up, her eyes glazed. "You just saved Rodriguez's life," Ramirez said, grabbing her by the shoulders and shaking her slightly. "You hear me? That man is breathing right now because you made a shot that most veteran snipers wouldn't have dared to take. Now I need you to get your head back in the game. This isn't over yet." "Sergeant, I can't," she whispered. "I don't know if I have anything left." "Yes, you do," he said firmly. "You already proved it. Now get back to that rifle and finish what you started." Sarah wiped her mouth with the back of her hand. She took the canteen Ramirez offered, rinsed the copper taste of bile from her mouth, and spat it into the sand. Her hands were still trembling, but her eyes were clear. She walked back to the truck, climbed into the bed, and reclaimed the rifle. She had 2 magazines left, 60 rounds. The attackers had pulled back after the failed breach, but they weren't retreating. She could see them regrouping in the shadow of the rocks, passing around ammunition and water. They were calling for reinforcements. The first wave had been a test. The second would be an execution. Morrison appeared below her again, his arm now properly bandaged and tucked into a sling. He was carrying a satchel of extra magazines. "Hayes is stable," he said. "He's still unconscious, but the medic says he'll make it if we can get him to a real hospital in the next hour." "That's because of you, Sarah." "How many did we lose?" she asked, her voice hollow. 3 from the convoy security team," Morrison said quietly, "but none from the SEAL unit." "Not yet. Again, that's because of you." "Don't," Sarah said, her voice cracking. "Don't make me a hero, Morrison. I'm just a girl trying not to die and trying not to let anyone else die." "That is literally the definition of a hero," Sarah Morrison replied. Before she could respond, the radio on Morrison's belt crackled to life with a burst of static that sounded like salvation. "Steel Thunder, this is Apache lead. We are 5 minutes from your position. Mark your location with smoke." Morrison keyed the radio, a look of profound relief washing over his battered features. "Apache lead, this is Steel Thunder. We are combat effective but have multiple urgent surgical wounded. Enemy forces are regrouping to our northeast, requesting an immediate gun run on those coordinates." "Copy that, Steel Thunder. We're painting the target now. You might want to keep your heads down. It's about to get loud." Sarah had never heard a more beautiful sound in her life than the low-frequency thrumming of the Apache helicopters as they crested the distant ridge. The twin engines screamed as they dove toward the valley, rockets already flaring from their pods and the 30 chain guns spinning up with a mechanical whine. The Taliban fighters heard them too. They broke cover, panicking as they tried to find shelter in a landscape that offered none against air power. It was a fatal mistake. Sarah Morrison's voice was quiet, almost reverent. "They're running. You don't have to shoot anymore." She lowered the rifle, the heavy barrel feeling like a weight of lead. She watched as the fighters scattered like insects. She watched as the Apaches opened fire with a precision that was both terrifying and magnificent, turning the hillside into a nightmare of fire, dust, and flying steel. Justice was raining from the sky. and for the first time in hours, Sarah felt like she could finally breathe. The entire engagement was over in 90 seconds. The silence that followed was heavy, an oppressive blanket that felt wrong after the cacophony of the battle. It was as if the world had forgotten how to make a normal sound. Sarah's ears were ringing, her shoulder was a bruised mass of purple and black, and her hands were covered in a dozen small cuts she didn't remember receiving. But she was alive. Steel Thunder, this is Apache lead. The area is secure. Medevac is inbound for your wounded. Well done down there. Whatever you did to hold them off, it worked. Morrison looked up at Sarah, and she saw tears tracking through the dust on his cheeks. Yeah, he said into the radio, his eyes locked on hers. We had a guardian angel watching over us today. The medevac arrived 8 minutes later, 3 Black Hawk helicopters that descended in a whirlwind of grit and noise. Medics poured out of the side doors, loading the wounded onto stretchers with a practiced, frantic efficiency. Hayes was the first one out, still pale and unconscious, but his breathing was steady. One of the medics, a woman with captain's bars on her collar and eyes that had seen far too much, stopped beside the truck. "You're Mitchell?" she asked. "The one who did the shooting?" "Yes, ma'am," Sarah said, her voice small. "I need to check you for wounds," the captain said, reaching up to help her down. "You're covered in blood." "It's not mine," Sarah said, her voice flat. "Let me be the judge of that," the officer replied. She checked Sarah over with gentle, professional hands, noting the bruising on her shoulder and the abrasions on her arms. "How many did you engage?" "I don't know," Sarah said. "I lost count." "The SEALs are saying at least 12 confirmed," the captain said, her voice filled with a quiet respect. "They're saying you held off an entire assault force by yourself when their primary marksman went down." Sarah didn't know how to respond to that. She couldn't find the words to explain the person she had become in the span of 30 minutes. She felt like a stranger in her own skin. The captain finished her exam, and then, in a move that caught Sarah completely off guard, she pulled the younger soldier into a quick, fierce hug. "You did good, soldier. Real good. Now let's get you home." The flight back to the main base was a blur of exhausted faces and the low hum of the helicopter's rotors. Sarah sat in a jump seat, Hayes's rifle still clutched in her hands, watching the desert floor scroll past beneath them. Rodriguez sat across from her, a fresh white bandage stark against his neck. "Hey, Montana," he shouted over the engine noise. She looked up. "Thank you for not missing." "Don't thank me yet," she said. "We're not home." "Close enough," Rodriguez said, closing his eyes and leaning his head back. "Close enough." When they landed back at the base, it was chaos. There were debriefing officers, medical teams, and reporters with cameras trying to get a glimpse of the miracle convoy survivors. Sarah tried to fade into the background, to disappear into the mundane world of logistics she had left only that morning, but Major Patterson found her before she could make it to the barracks. "Mitchell, my office. Now." She followed him through the maze of tents, her heart sinking. She expected a reprimand. She expected to be lectured about staying in her lane and the dangers of a logistics specialist playing hero. Instead, when they reached his office, Patterson closed the door, sat behind his desk, and looked at her for a long, silent minute. "You're being recommended," he said finally. "For what, sir?" "A Bronze Star with Valor, possibly more, depending on the SEAL commander's final report. He wants you officially commended for saving his entire unit." Sarah felt the floor drop out from under her. "Sir, I was just doing my job." "Your job is counting crates and loading ammunition, Mitchell. Not engaging enemy combatants at 400 yards. Not making a hostage rescue shot with a sidearm you aren't even qualified to carry. Not saving the lives of the most elite warriors in the American military." Patterson looked incredibly tired. "What you did out there today, that wasn't training, it wasn't luck. That was natural talent meeting an impossible situation and somehow coming out on top." "I don't want a medal, sir." "Tough," Patterson said. "You're getting one." He pulled a folder from his desk and slid it toward her. "I've been reviewing your file, 7 months of logistics duty, 0 errors. And apparently you've spent 6 nights a week at the practice range for the last 5 months. Why didn't you tell anyone you could shoot like that?" "I didn't want special treatment, sir. I just wanted to do the job I was given." "Well, congratulations, Mitchell. Your job just changed." Patterson slid a second paper across the desk. "This is a formal recommendation for the U.S. Army Sniper School. If you accept, you ship out in 2 weeks. If you decline, you go back to the warehouse and we pretend today never happened." Sarah stared at the paper as if it were a live grenade. "Sir, I can't." "You can," Patterson said. "And before you give me a list of reasons why you aren't ready, let me tell you what Lieutenant Hayes said before they put him under for surgery. He said, and I quote, 'That girl has the gift.' Don't let the Army waste it. A Navy SEAL with 15 years of combat experience thinks you belong in the long-range program, Mitchell. Are you going to tell him he's wrong? Sarah's hands started to shake again, but this time it wasn't from fear or exhaustion. It was from the sheer, overwhelming weight of possibility. Can I think about it, sir? You have 24 hours, Patterson said, standing up. Then I need an answer. Either way, Mitchell, thank you. You saved a lot of good men today. Sarah walked out into the desert heat, her mind a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. She found herself wandering toward the logistics warehouse, her warehouse. It was the place where she had spent the last 7 months counting bullets and dreaming small, safe dreams. She sat down in the sand behind the building, the silence of the base a sharp contrast to the roar of the canyon. She remembered Corporal Jensen's voice. He had told her that if the day ever came where being a clerk wasn't enough, when the world needed her to be more than the girl who carries things, she shouldn't hesitate. She hadn't hesitated. She had picked up the rifle and she had become exactly what the moment demanded. But could she do it again? Could she walk away from the safety of the crates and the manifests and enter a world where her value was measured in the lives she took? She sat there for an hour, watching the sun dip toward the horizon, casting long, purple shadows over the Montana-like hills in the distance. And slowly, she realized that the choice had already been made. The moment she pulled the trigger to save Rodriguez, she had crossed a line. There was no going back to the warehouse. Not really. The girl who had left that morning was gone, buried somewhere in that dried riverbed. The next morning at 0600, Sarah stood outside Major Patterson's office. He looked up, unsurprised to see her. That was faster than 24 hours, he noted. I accept, sir, she said, her voice steady. You're sure? Sniper school has a 70% failure rate. Most of the washouts are infantrymen with years of experience. You'll be the only woman in your class, and they are going to make your life a living hell just to prove you don't belong there. I know, sir. Patterson studied her face, looking for any hint of doubt. He found nothing but a quiet, iron determination. Why, Mitchell? You could have a safe, decent career in logistics. Why choose the hard path? Because I already crossed the line, sir, she said. Going back now would be lying about who I am. Patterson signed the recommendation with a flourish. You ship out Monday. Don't make me regret this. I won't, sir. As she walked out into the morning light, she saw Morrison sitting on a bench near the medical tent, his arm in a proper sling. He looked up and grinned. Well, he asked. I'm going, she said. Sniper school? Yeah. Good, Morrison said, winnowing as he stood up. We need more people out there who can actually hit what they are aiming at. Lord knows the Army is full of guys who couldn't hit a barn door from the inside. Your Navy, Morrison, you don't get an opinion on the Army, she teased. Fair point. He walked over to her, his expression turning serious. Listen, Sarah, what you did out there. It wasn't beginner's luck. It was something real. Don't let those instructors get in your head. You belong there, you earned it. I killed 12 people, Morrison, she said quietly. I don't feel like I earned anything except nightmares. Welcome to the club, he replied, his voice softening. We meet on Thursdays at the base psychologist's office. But listen, those nightmares, they mean you're still human. The day you stop caring about the lives you take is the day you need to turn in your rifle. Until then, you use that weight to make sure every shot matters. That's what separates us from them. Sarah nodded, not trusting herself to speak. Hayes wants to see you, by the way, Morrison added. Medical tent, bed 7. He woke up an hour ago asking for Montana. Sarah found Hayes propped up on pillows, his chest wrapped in thick layers of gauze. He looked pale and fragile, a far cry from the invincible warrior she had seen in the heat of battle. Mitchell, he rasped. They told me what you did. I just picked up your rifle, sir. Bullshit, Hayes coughed, then winced. You saved my team. Morrison told me about the hostage shot. Where did you learn to do that? Corporal Jensen, she said, and a lot of practice. Practice doesn't give you that kind of nerve, Hayes said. You've got the gift, Sarah. Don't let them take it from you. You're going to be one of the best. Sarah stood by his bed for a long time, listening to the steady beep of the monitors. She realized then that she wasn't just a logistics specialist anymore. She wasn't just a girl from Montana. She was a protector. And as she walked out of the tent and toward her new life, she knew that the road ahead would be brutal, but she was ready. She had found her purpose in the dust of a dried riverbed, and she wasn't going to let it go. I understand, sir. Sarah's voice was barely a whisper, thick with the weight of the moment. No, you don't, not yet, but you will. Hayes reached out, his hand calloused and trembling slightly, yet he grabbed her hand with a strength that caught her off guard. It was the grip of a man who had held onto life when everything else had been stripped away. When it gets hard, and it will get impossibly hard, you remember why you picked up that rifle. Not because someone ordered you, not because it was your job, but because people needed you and you didn't hesitate. That's the core of what makes a good sniper, Mitchell. Everything else. The math, the windage, the trigger squeeze, that's just mechanics. Sarah squeezed his hand back, her vision blurring as tears finally threatened to spill over. The sterile, metallic smell of the medical tent seemed to press in on her, making the world feel very small. Thank you, sir. For the pistol, for the advice, for trusting me with your rifle. Thank you for not letting me die in the dirt like a dog. Hayes released her hand, the effort of the conversation visible in the shallow rise and fall of his chest. He settled back into the thin pillows, his eyes already beginning to glaze with the exhaustion of recovery. Now get out of here. You've got 4 days to get your affairs in order before you ship out. Don't waste them crying over an old SEAL who's too stubborn to die. Sarah left the medical tent into the harsh glare of the afternoon sun, feeling like a ghost walking through a world she no longer belonged to. She spent the next 4 days in a blur of frantic preparation and hollow dread. She sat in the dim light of the barracks and wrote letters to her mother, trying to find words that could bridge the gap between the girl who had left Montana and the woman who was now a killer. She explained everything and nothing at all, speaking of duty and honor while leaving out the copper taste of blood and the sound of a man's final breath. Most of her modest possessions were given away to other soldiers, a way of shedding her skin. She ran 10 miles every morning before the sun had even cleared the horizon. She ran until her lungs felt like they were filled with hot coals and her legs screamed for her to stop, trying to forge her body into a weapon capable of carrying the weight she had chosen. Every night, she returned to the range one last time. She fired until the stars came out, the rhythmic crack of the rifle a mechanical lullaby. She was saying goodbye to the simple version of herself, the girl who believed that practice was enough, that talent was a shield, and that the world was a place where things made sense. Monday morning arrived with the cold, gray light of an execution date. The transport flight to Fort Benning, Georgia, was a grueling 14-hour journey with endless stops at desolate airfields. Sarah sat in stony silence, her rucksack between her knees, surrounded by infantry soldiers heading to various specialized schools. They were loud, cocky, and overflowing with a bravado that felt brittle to her. They swapped stories of what they would do when they got their tabs, completely unaware that she was about to walk into a crucible that would systematically break most of them. She looked at their young faces and felt 1,000 years older. Sniper school didn't start with a welcome or a briefing. It started at 0500 on Tuesday morning with a 3-mile run in full combat gear under the humid, suffocating canopy of the Georgia woods. Sarah finished middle of the pack, her chest heaving, sweat stinging her eyes. To her, it felt like a small victory just to stay upright, until a grizzled sergeant named Vance, with eyes like chips of flint and a face carved from granite, stopped directly in front of her. His presence was a physical weight. "You're Mitchell?" The words were spat out like an accusation. "Yes, Sergeant," she managed to gasp. The logistics girl who thinks she can shoot. Sarah straightened her spine, meeting his gaze with a level of intensity that made the soldiers around her shift uncomfortably. "I don't think, Sergeant. I know." Vance's expression didn't flicker. He didn't seem impressed or angered. He simply looked through her. "We'll see, drop and give me 50. Sarah hit the dirt without a word. She pumped out 50 push-ups while the rest of the class watched in a silence broken only by the sound of her own rhythmic breathing. When she stood back up, her face was smeared with Georgia clay, but her eyes hadn't moved from his. Vance was still staring. "That was for having an ego," he said coldly. "The next 50 will be for keeping it. The 50 after that will be for every time you prove me wrong about you not belonging here. Are we clear, Mitchell?" "Crystal, Sergeant." "Outstanding. Fall in." The first week was a calculated assault designed to break bodies. It was a blur of 20-mile marches with 80-pound packs that felt like they were trying to fuse to their spines. They ran obstacle courses in the pouring rain, slipping through freezing mud and scaling walls that felt like mountains. The physical training was endless, leaving Sarah vomiting behind trees and waking up in the middle of the night with muscles that screamed in protest at the slightest movement. But she didn't quit. She couldn't. Every time she felt her knees buckle, she saw Hayes's face in the dirt and remembered the weight of the rifle in her hands. The second week moved from the physical to the psychological, designed to shatter their minds. Sleep became a luxury they couldn't afford. They were subjected to stress positions for hours, forced to hold their rifles at arm's length while instructors screamed contradictory orders in their ears. They were tasked with zeroing their rifles under conditions of extreme sleep deprivation, their eyes burning and their focus fraying like an old rope. Sarah watched 3 men quit in a single day. They walked off the range with their heads down, their dreams of being elite marksmen shattered by the sheer mental grind. She watched them go and felt nothing but a grim determination to stay. The 3rd week was when the actual shooting started, and that was when the floor fell out from under her. Sarah stepped up to the firing line with a confidence born from 100 nights of solitary practice. She raised her rifle, found her rhythm, and missed the target completely. She blinked, adjusted her grip, and fired again. Another miss. What the hell was that, Mitchell? Vance appeared beside her like a vengeful ghost, his voice a low growl. You're supposed to be some kind of prodigy and you can't hit a stationary target at 300 yards. Sergeant, I don't know what again. She commanded, she fired, missed. Again, missed. Again, missed. By the 10th shot, Sarah's hands were shaking so violently she had to lower the weapon. Her vision was blurring with a mix of sweat and frustration, and she could feel the entire class watching her fail. The girl who saved the SEALs was falling apart on a standard qualification range. Vance finally stepped forward and grabbed the rifle from her hands, his eyes searching hers. What's different, Mitchell? What's different between here and wherever you learned to shoot? Sarah's mind raced, searching for an answer she didn't have. Everything was different. The rifle was different. The targets were paper instead of flesh. The pressure was a cold, clinical thing instead of the hot, jagged adrenaline of a firefight. She had learned on Hayes's rifle in the chaos of an ambush, with the smell of cordite and the screams of the wounded driving every shot. Now she was trying to recreate that precision in a sterile, safe training environment, and her body was refusing to cooperate. I learned under fire, Sergeant, with people depending on me. This feels like practice, and my body knows the difference. Vance's eyes narrowed into slits. So you're telling me you can only shoot when people are dying? That's not a sniper, Mitchell. That's a liability. No, Sergeant, she argued, her voice cracking. I'm telling you I need to find a way to make this matter the same way that did. Vance didn't offer sympathy. Then figure it out. You've got until Friday to qualify, or you're out of my school and back to moving crates. Dismissed. Sarah walked off the range feeling as though she had been gutted. She had 4 days to solve a psychological puzzle she didn't understand, or everything she had sacrificed would be for nothing. The nightmares, the guilt, the decision to become someone new, it would all be a footnote in a failed career. That night she lay in her bunk, staring at the corrugated metal ceiling while her bunkmate, a cocky ranger named Patterson, snored like a chainsaw. The darkness felt heavy, pressing down on her chest. Can't sleep either, huh? Sarah looked over to the bunk across from her. It was the only other person still awake, a quiet kid from Ohio named Chen. He was small for a soldier, with a thoughtful face and eyes that always seemed to be calculating something. He'd barely spoken 10 words since they arrived. No, Sarah replied. You've been thinking about quitting? Chen's voice was flat, defeated. I'm last in the class. Can't make the run times. Can't hit the targets consistently. I don't know why I thought I could do this. Because someone told you that you could, or because you needed to prove something to yourself? Sarah asked. Same as everyone here. Yeah, well, needing to prove something doesn't make you qualified. Chen rolled over to face her, his expression earnest in the shadows. What about you? You're the girl from the convoy, right? The one who saved the SEAL team. That's me, she whispered. So why are you failing the shooting calls? Everyone says you're supposed to be some kind of natural. Sarah closed her eyes, feeling the weight of the question. Because I don't know how to shoot when it doesn't matter. And until I figure that out, all the natural talent in the world doesn't mean anything. Chen was quiet for a long moment, the only sound the distant barking of a dog and the hum of the barracks. Maybe that's the wrong question, he said finally. What do you mean? You're asking how to make this matter, but what if the real question is why it mattered before? What were you thinking about when you pulled the trigger in that firefight? Sarah's mind immediately went back to that stretch of dusty road. She saw Hayes bleeding in the dirt, his life leaking into the sand. She saw Rodriguez with a knife at his throat, his eyes wide with a terror that haunted her dreams. She heard Morrison screaming for help. I was thinking about keeping them alive, she said. So think about that here, Chen replied. Every target you hit is someone who lives. Every target you miss is someone who doesn't. Make it matter by deciding it matters. It was simple advice, perhaps too simple, but it was the only thing she had. Sarah spent the next 3 days testing the theory. Slowly, almost impossibly, it started to work. She stopped seeing the paper targets as cardboard silhouettes and started seeing them as threats. She stopped hearing the clinical range commands and started hearing the ghost of Morrison screaming for covering fire. She stopped feeling the safety of the Georgia woods and started feeling the weight of lives depending on her. She built a battlefield inside her own mind, and suddenly, the rifle felt like an extension of her soul again. By Friday morning, when Vance called her to the line for her final qualification test, the air was thick and heavy with the threat of rain. 10 shots, Mitchell. 7 out of 10 to pass. Miss more than 3 and you're done here. Do you understand? Yes, Sergeant. Then prove me wrong about you. Sarah raised the rifle, the wood cool against her cheek. She found the first target through the scope and didn't see paper. She saw Hayes's face. She saw him bleeding. She saw herself picking up his rifle because there was no one else left. She fired. The recoil was a familiar kick against her shoulder. Hit, second target. She saw Rodriguez with a knife at his throat, his eyes begging her not to miss. She breathed out, felt the space between heartbeats, and pulled the trigger. Hit, third target. Morrison with his arms shattered, trusting her to keep the enemy at bay while he struggled to survive. Hit. By the 10th shot, Sarah's hands were as steady as stone. Her breathing was a slow, controlled rhythm that ignored the humidity and the pressure of the onlookers. Every target had a whole dead center. Vance walked down the range to personally check the results. When he came back, his expression was unreadable, his flint-like eyes searching hers for a long time. 10 out of 10, Mitchell. A perfect score. He paused, a rare moment of hesitation. First perfect score I've seen in 3 years. Whatever you figured out between Monday and today, don't lose it. You're going to need it where you're going. Yes, Sergeant. Dismissed. Sarah walked off the range feeling like she could finally breathe. She had crossed some invisible threshold, proving to herself that the firefight hadn't been a fluke, a moment of luck born from desperation. She could do this. She was meant for this. Chen caught up with her afterward, a genuine grin breaking across his weary face. Heard you went perfect. Nice work, Montana. Thanks, Sarah said, feeling a warmth she hadn't felt in weeks. How'd you do? 8 out of 10, passed by 1 shot. His grin faded slightly as he looked down at his boots. I'm still last in physical training, though. I probably won't make it past next week's ruck march. My legs just aren't built for this. Yes, you will, Sarah said firmly. How do you know? Because I'm going to pace you. We're going to finish that march together, middle of the pack, and you're going to make it through this. Deal. Chen looked at her as if she had just offered him a lifeline in a storm. Why would you do that? Helping me might hurt your own scores. Because someone helped me when I needed it, she replied. A corporal named Jensen taught me to shoot when I was nobody. A lieutenant named Hayes gave me a chance when I was terrified. Now I'm paying it forward. So deal or no deal? Deal. Chen extended his hand and Sarah shook it, sealing a partnership that would carry them both through the next 8 weeks of absolute hell. The ruck march happened 3 days later, 20 miles through the rugged Georgia wilderness with 90 pounds of gear. It was a distance designed to break spirits as much as bodies. Sarah and Chen stayed together the entire way. She encouraged him through the blinding pain in his joints, and he pushed her when her own energy began to flag. They finished with only 2 minutes to spare, collapsing across the line as their lungs burned. Vance was waiting at the finish line, watching them stumble across together with his arms crossed. Mitchell, Chen, you two have been butted up this whole time. Yes, Sergeant, they answered in unison, their voices raspy. Good. Snipers work in pairs, shooter and spotter. You help each other survive or you both die. I'm glad to see you figured that out without me having to beat it into your skulls. He checked his clipboard, his pen scratching against the paper. You're officially paired for the rest of training. Don't make me regret it. The partnership changed everything. Chen was a brilliant student of mathematics, possessing an innate ability for wind calculation and atmospheric adjustments, skills Sarah had struggled to master. In return, Sarah was exceptional at fieldcraft and camouflage, moving through the brush like a shadow, areas where Chen's city-born instincts had initially failed him. Together, they became a single, lethal unit, covering each other's weaknesses and amplifying their strengths. By week 6, they were in the top 10% of the class. By week 8, they were in the top 5. By week 10, when the final examination approached, they were competing for first place with a pair of seasoned rangers who had been shooting since they were old enough to walk. The final exam was a brutal 2-day field exercise. It required sniper teams to infiltrate deep into simulated enemy territory, establish a hidden observation post, report on enemy movements, and then take a single, perfect shot at a high-value target before exfiltrating without being detected. Sarah and Chen drew the hardest objective on the map. Their target was 500 yards across a jagged ravine with enemy patrols scheduled every 30 minutes. They had only a 4-hour window to complete the mission once they reached their position. They spent the first day crawling through underbrush so thick and thorny it drew blood, moving only inches at a time to avoid snapping a single twig. It took them 6 hours just to cover 300 yards. They built their hide site in total darkness, using natural materials and painstaking care to create a position that was invisible from even 5 feet away. Then they waited. The silence of the woods was heavy. Hour 1 passed with no sign of the target. Hour 2 brought patrols passing so close that Sarah could smell the acrid scent of their cigarette smoke and hear the low murmur of their voices. Her heart hammered against her ribs, but she didn't move a muscle. Hour 3 saw the target appear briefly in a doorway, then vanish before Chen could confirm the range. Hour 4 arrived, their last chance. The target stepped out of a small building, standing in the open for what they knew would be a fleeting window. Range is 543 yards, Chen whispered, his eyes glued to the spotting scope. Wind is 3 miles per hour left to right. Elevation plus 2.4 mils. You've got maybe 10 seconds before he moves back inside. Sarah settled behind the rifle, the world narrowing down to the crosshairs. She saw the instructor wearing the high-value target vest, talking on a radio, completely unaware of the 2 students watching him from the shadows. Breathe. In, out. Between heartbeats, she squeezed the trigger. The crack of the rifle seemed to echo forever in the still air. The instructor looked down at the bright paint mark on his chest, then slowly raised his hand in a silent acknowledgement of the hit. The range safety officer's voice crackled over the radio, sounding distant and tinny. Confirmed kill. Team Mitchell-Chen, you are cleared to exfiltrate. They crawled out of that hide site with the same agonizing care they had used to get in, taking another 4 hours to reach the safe zone. By the time they finally stumbled across the finish line, they had been in the field for 36 hours straight without sleep or hot food, their bodies covered in scratches and grime. Vance met them with an expression that might have actually been a smile. Not bad, you two. Not bad at all. Did we pass, Sergeant? Chen asked, his voice barely a croak. You didn't just pass, you set a new course record. A 543-yard shot in variable wind conditions with a 4-second target window. That's the kind of shooting that wins wars. He reached into his pocket and handed them each a patch, the sniper school graduation patch that only 30% of candidates ever earned. Congratulations, you're officially qualified. Sarah held the patch in her shaking hands, feeling the immense weight of everything it represented. The lonely nights of practice, the faces of those she had killed, the doubt, the fear, and the sheer, stubborn determination that had brought her from a logistics warehouse to this moment. Chen grabbed her in a sudden bear hug, laughing and crying at the same time. We did it. Holy hell, Montana, we actually did it. Yeah, Sarah whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Yeah, we did. The graduation ceremony was a small, somber affair. There were only the surviving candidates, their instructors, and a handful of family members who had made the long trip to Georgia. Sarah's mother couldn't afford the plane ticket from Montana, but she had sent a letter that Sarah had already read 3 times. My dear Sarah, it began, I know you think you joined the army to run away from grief, but I think you joined to run towards something bigger than yourself. Whatever happens, wherever this path takes you, know that I am proud of the woman you've become. Love, Mom. Sarah folded the letter carefully and tucked it into her uniform pocket, resting right over her heart. Vance called her name, and she walked across the small stage to receive her certificate and her official designation as a U.S. Army sniper. The applause was polite and brief. There were no cameras, no grand speeches, no celebrations, just a quiet recognition that she had achieved something most people would never even attempt. Afterward, Vance pulled her aside one last time. You've got orders, Mitchell. You're shipping out to Afghanistan in 2 weeks. You've been assigned to a forward operating base that specializes in long-range reconnaissance. You'll be partnered with Chen since you two work so well together. Afghanistan. Sarah's stomach clenched at the word. Back to the dust, back to the war, back to the place where she had killed her first person and changed forever. Problem with that? Vance asked. No, Sergeant, just processing. Good, because they specifically requested you. Someone over there saw your after-action report from Operation Steel Thunder and wants the girl who held off an assault force with a rifle she'd never touched before. Vance's expression softened just for a second. Listen, Mitchell, what you did in that firefight was extraordinary. What you did here in training was exceptional. But what you're about to do back in Afghanistan is going to define whether you're just talented or actually great. The difference is simple. Talented people succeed when conditions are right. Great people succeed despite conditions being wrong. I understand, Sergeant. I hope so. Because war doesn't care about your training or your talent. It only cares about results. You bring Chen home alive. You complete your missions, and you don't let the weight of all those kills turn you into someone you don't recognize. Can you do that? Sarah thought about Hayes, about Morrison, about Rodriguez. She thought about every shot she had fired and every nightmare that still woke her up at 3 o'clock in the morning. I can do that, Sergeant. Then dismissed. And Mitchell, don't die over there. You're too good at this to waste on a Taliban bullet. The next 2 weeks were a blur of preparation and a strange mixture of excitement and dread. Sarah qualified as an expert on 4 different weapon systems. She memorized maps of the Afghan terrain until she could see the ridgelines in her sleep, and she wrote one more letter to her mother, trying to explain why she was choosing to go back. Late at night, when the barracks were silent, she cleaned her rifle with a ritualistic focus. She remembered Corporal Jensen's final words: "If the day ever comes when being logistics isn't enough, you pick up that rifle and you do what you were born to do." She had picked it up. Now she had to prove she was born for it. The Chinook helicopter touched down at forward operating base Viper just after midnight, its rotors beating the dry Afghan air into submission. Sarah stepped off the ramp onto soil that felt simultaneously foreign and terrifyingly familiar. The smell of the desert, a mix of dust, diesel, and ancient heat, triggered memories she had spent months trying to box away. Chen dropped his gear beside her, squinting at the stark, fortified compound illuminated by flickering floodlights. "Well, this looks cheerful," he muttered. "Yeah, home sweet hell," Sarah replied, shouldering her pack. "Let's find whoever's expecting us." They found him in the Tactical Operations Center, a room humming with the low drone of computers and the static of radios. Captain Marcus Reeves was hunched over a map with the intensity of a predator. He was 32, on his 3rd tour, with eyes that had seen too much and still seemed to be searching for more. "Mitchell and Chen, I presume?" He didn't look up immediately. "Yes, sir," Sarah replied. Reeves straightened and studied them with the clinical assessment of a man evaluating weapons rather than human beings. "I read your files. Impressive performance at sniper school. First in your class. Record-breaking final exam." He paused, his gaze fixing on Sarah. "Mitchell, your after-action report from Operation Steel Thunder is legendary in some circles. 12 confirmed kills with a weapon system you weren't even qualified on. A hostage rescue shot with a sidearm. Held off an entire assault force while a SEAL team was compromised. Is that true, or did someone embellish the report to make a logistics clerk look like a hero?" "It's true, sir," Sarah said, her voice steady. "Good, because I need that same person here. Not the student who barely passed PT, not the girl who got lucky once. I need the warrior who didn't hesitate when men were dying. Can you be her again?" Sarah felt a cold, familiar sensation slide down her spine, the feeling of the world narrowing down to a single objective. "Yes, sir. Prove it. You deploy on your first mission tomorrow at 0500. It's a high-value target deep in Taliban territory with minimal support. You'll be observing a compound where we believe a bomb maker is operating. Your job is confirmation and elimination if the opportunity presents itself. Any questions?" Sir Chen spoke up. "We just arrived. Shouldn't we acclimate, learn the terrain, meet the rest of the team?" Reeves smiled, but there was no humor in it. "Welcome to Viper, Mitchell Chen. We don't have time for acclimation here. The enemy doesn't wait for you to get comfortable. You're either ready to work or you're not. Which is it?" Chen looked at Sarah, then back at the captain. "We're ready, sir. Outstanding. Briefing at 0400. Don't be late." Dismissed, they left the TOC in silence, following aboard private to their quarters, a cramped plywood structure that rattled every time the wind picked up. "Montana," Chen said once they were alone. "Are we actually ready for this?" "No," Sarah admitted as she started unpacking her gear with mechanical precision. "But we're going anyway." "That's not reassuring," Chen muttered. "It's not supposed to be. Reeves is testing us. He wants to see if we freeze under the pressure of the real world or if we deliver. So we deliver. And if we can't?" Chen asked. "Then people die," Sarah said. "Just like always, so we make sure we can't fail." The briefing at 0400 was brief and brutal. They were shown grainy intelligence photos of a fortified compound nestled in a valley and satellite imagery of patrol patterns that looked like clockwork. The dossier was on a man named Ahmed Shah, a bomb maker responsible for 17 IED attacks that had claimed the lives of 43 coalition soldiers in the last 6 months alone. "This man is a priority," Reeves explained, his finger tapping the photo. "We've been hunting him for 8 months. Every time we get close, he vanishes into the hills. But our sources say he's there right now, building his next batch of death. Your job is to get eyes on and confirm. If you have the shot, you take it. Rules of engagement are weapons free on positive ID." Sarah studied the layout. The compound had 2 main buildings, a guard tower, and walls that provided excellent cover for the defenders but terrible sight lines for anyone trying to approach. "Sir, this position is heavily fortified. What's our exfiltration plan if we're compromised?" Reeves's eyes went hard, reflecting the dim light of the briefing room. "You don't get compromised. You establish a hide site with a clear line of sight, you complete the mission, and you walk out the same way you walked in, invisible and silent. And if something goes wrong," Sarah pressed, "then you adapt, you overcome, and you survive, because I'm not sending a rescue team into that valley for 2 snipers who couldn't handle a basic observation mission. Is that clear?" "Clear, sir." They inserted via helicopter 3 hours later. The Chinook dropped them on a jagged ridgeline 2 miles from the target. The pilot didn't even touch the ground, hovering just long enough for Sarah and Chen to jump into the swirling dust before banking hard and disappearing into the pre-dawn darkness. Suddenly, the silence of the mountains rushed in to meet them, and they were alone. Sarah adjusted the weight of her rifle, the familiar coldness of the metal grounding her. She looked at Chen, who was already checking his compass and scanning the horizon. This was it. The training was over, the ghosts were waiting, and the desert was calling for blood again. The silence of the Hindu Kush was a heavy, physical thing, a weight that pressed against the eardrums until every internal sound, the rush of blood in the temples, the rhythmic thud of a heart, seemed loud enough to give away their position. Sarah Mitchell lay perfectly still, her body molded into the jagged, unforgiving terrain. Beside her, Chen was a shadow among shadows, his breathing so shallow it barely stirred the dust. They were deep in territory where the maps were mostly guesses and every village was a potential hornet's nest. The mission was simple in its phrasing but impossible in its weight. Find Ahmad Shah, the man responsible for more American casualties than any other bomb maker in the province, and end him. Chen leaned in, his voice a mere vibration against the mountain air, whispering that this was terrifying. Sarah didn't look at him, her eyes fixed on the path ahead, but she felt the truth of it in her marrow. She whispered back a 2-word command that was as much for herself as it was for him. They had to move out. The 2-mile trek to their vantage point took 4 agonizing hours. It wasn't a walk. It was a slow-motion struggle against a landscape that seemed consciously designed to betray them. Every shifting pebble sounded like a landslide in the pre-dawn stillness. Every startled bird that took flight felt like a flare launched into the sky to announce their presence. For the final 1,000 yards, they didn't even use their knees, crawling on their bellies through the dirt and shale, dragging their rifles behind them like heavy, metallic appendages. Sarah could feel her heart hammering against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage of bone. She focused on her breathing, trying to harmonize it with the wind, trying to become part of the mountain itself. They finally reached the cluster of boulders that would serve as their hide, a natural fortress with a perfect line of sight to the low-walled compound nestled in the valley below. They settled in, the wait beginning as the first gray light of morning began to bleed over the horizon. The first hour passed with the slow, grinding pace of a glacier. Through the high-powered optics of her scope, the world was a circle of high-definition clarity. She watched the guards rotate shifts, men with weathered faces and AK-47s slung casually over their shoulders. They moved with the boredom of those who believed their mountain sanctuary was impenetrable. In the second hour, a dusty truck rattled into the compound, its engine protesting the incline. Sarah counted 8 fighters as they emerged to unload crates, their movements efficient and practiced. These weren't just insurgents, they were a professional cell, well-funded and well-disciplined. By the third hour, the heat began to rise, shimmering off the rocks in distorted waves. Chen, peering through the spotting scope, nudged her arm. He'd spotted a man matching Ahmad Shah's description, entering the main mud brick building. He muttered that the beard matched the intelligence photos and the build looked right, but the angle prevented a positive identification of the face. Sarah shifted her weight, the movement infinitesimal, and found the figure in her crosshairs. She watched him walk across the courtyard, her mind running through the data points they'd been drilled on for weeks. The intelligence reports highlighted a specific detail. Shaw had a distinct limp, a souvenir from a coalition raid years prior. This man, however, moved with a fluid, easy grace. She shook her head, her eye never leaving the glass. It wasn't him. The clothes were wrong, the gait was wrong. She told Chen to keep watching. The fourth hour was a test of endurance. The sun beat down on their backs, and the temptation to shift, to stretch a cramped muscle, was a constant siren song. They remained frozen. Finally, in the fifth hour, the door to the second building opened, and the air seemed to leave Sarah's lungs. A man walked out, and she knew instantly it was the target. Ahmed Shaw was smaller than he appeared in the photographs, an older man who moved with the calculated, careful precision of a survivor. He was a predator who had stayed alive by being more patient and more intelligent than the armies hunting him. In one hand, he held a cell phone, and in the other, a small device that Sarah's training immediately identified as a remote detonator. Chen confirmed the match, his voice tight with the sudden surge of adrenaline. The beard, the limp, the build, it was all there. He rattled off the technical data like a machine. Range 632 yards, wind 4 miles per hour quartering right, temperature rising, air density dropping. Sarah made the adjustments on her turrets, the clicks of the dial feeling like thunder in the silence of the hide. She settled the crosshairs on Shaw's chest. Through the scope, she could see the texture of his vest, the way he gestured with the phone, completely unaware that he was staring into the eyes of his own death. Chen gave the green light. The background was clear, no civilians were in sight, and the target was stationary. This was the moment everything had led to, the years of training, the grueling days at sniper school, the voluntary return to the desert. She began to take up the slack on the trigger, her breath held, the world narrowing down to a single point of impact. Then the world changed. A flash of bright color erupted from the doorway of the building. A little girl, perhaps 6 years old, wearing a vibrant blue dress that stood out against the drab browns of the compound, ran out into the sunlight. She was laughing, chasing a ball that bounced unevenly across the dirt. She ran straight toward Shaw, who didn't hesitate. He scooped her up in his arms, the detonator still in his hand, and spun her around with an easy, fatherly familiarity. Sarah's finger froze on the trigger. Chen's voice hissed in her ear, urgent and harsh. He told her she still had the shot. He reminded her that Shaw was a legitimate target, a mass murderer, and that the presence of the child didn't change the mission parameters. But Sarah's hand had begun to shake, a fine, uncontrollable tremor that made the crosshairs dance across Shaw's torso. In the circle of the scope, she wasn't seeing a terrorist. She was seeing a father holding his daughter. She saw the girl's giggles, the way she clung to his neck. Every instinct she possessed, every moral fiber of her being, screamed that she couldn't do it. She couldn't be the person who took a father's life while his child was in his arms. Chen pressured her again, noting they only had seconds before the man retreated back into the safety of the mud walls. He reminded her why they were there, the lives Shaw had taken, the mission they had sworn to complete. Sarah's finger tightened again, the cold steel of the trigger biting into her skin. She looked at the girl's face, then back at the center mass of Shaw's chest. The girl was facing away, she wouldn't see the impact, wouldn't see the blood. It would be over in an instant, but Sarah couldn't pull through the brake. She pulled her eye away from the scope, her breathing coming in ragged, shallow gasps. She told Chen she couldn't do it, not like this. They would wait for another chance. The silence that followed was suffocating. Chen didn't speak for a long time, his frustration radiating off him like heat from a radiator. He warned her that their commanding officer, Reeves, would have their heads for coming back empty-handed. Sarah didn't care. She told him that living with a failed mission was better than living with the image of a child covered in her father's blood. She knew Shaw was a monster. She knew he had killed dozens of people, but she wouldn't cross that line. They watched, helpless, as Shaw carried the laughing girl back inside the building. The door closed and the opportunity vanished into the shadows. They stayed in that position for 6 more hours, hoping for a second chance that never materialized. The sun began its slow descent, painting the mountains in hues of bruised purple and gold. As the extraction window approached, they were forced to pack their gear and begin the grim, silent trek back to the landing zone. The walk back was a different kind of torture. The physical exertion was the same, but the weight of failure made every step feel like a mile. Chen didn't argue, but the air between them was thick with a disapproval that didn't need words. They reached the extraction point at 2200 hours, the thrum of the Chinook's rotors a dull roar in the night. They boarded the helicopter and flew back to Base Viper in a silence that felt like a wall between them. Reeves was waiting for them at the landing zone, his silhouette framed by the harsh floodlights of the base. Sarah reported that no shot was taken, citing the presence of civilians in the line of fire. Reeves's face transformed in an instant, shifting from expectation to a cold, vibrating fury. He couldn't believe they had Ahmad Shah in their sights and let him walk. He stepped into Sarah's personal space, his voice dropping to a deadly, quiet whisper. He reminded her of the 43 American soldiers Shaw had murdered, 43 families shattered, and he mocked her concern for the daughter of a terrorist. Sarah stood her ground, her gaze level with his. She told him the risk of collateral damage was too high, that the shot wasn't guaranteed to be clean with the child in his arms. Reeves scoffed, reminding her of her record-breaking scores and her performance under fire during her training. He knew she could have made that shot. Sarah didn't flinch. She admitted she could have made the shot, but she had chosen not to. The slap was sudden and violent, the force of it snapping her head to the side. The taste of copper filled her mouth as her lips split against her teeth. Before Reeves could strike again, Chen was there, stepping between them with his hands raised in a calming gesture, citing the rules of engagement and the requirement to minimize civilian casualties. Reeves shoved Chen aside, his face inches from Sarah's. He told her she had one job and she had failed because she got squeamish. He asked if she thought Shaw cared about the children of the men he killed, or if he lost sleep over American orphans. Sarah touched her burning cheek and looked him in the eye. She told him she cared because she wasn't like Shaw. She was a soldier, and soldiers didn't shoot children or fathers holding them, no matter how much they might deserve to die. Reeves stared at her, something dark and dangerous flickering in his eyes. He relieved them both of duty and confined them to quarters, pending an investigation into their failure. The walk back to their plywood barracks was a blur of shock. Chen looked at her as if she were a ghost, or perhaps someone who had just committed professional suicide. Sarah lay on her bunk, staring at the ceiling, trying to reconcile her choice with the reality of her career. She remembered what her instructor, Hayes, had told her about being stubborn and adaptable. She felt she was being both, stubborn in her morality and adapting to a situation where the mission and her conscience were at war. If that made her a failure in the eyes of the army, then she would accept that. Chen, sitting on his own bunk with his head in his arms, told her she was just trying to be a good person in a world that didn't reward it. They spent 3 days in isolation, watching the rhythm of the base continue without them. Sarah spent the time writing to her mother, trying to find the words to explain why she might be coming home with a dishonorable discharge. But on the 3rd day, the world was torn apart. At 0300, a massive explosion rocked the base. The shockwave rattled the barracks, and the screams of sirens immediately filled the night. Disregarding their confinement, Sarah and Chen grabbed their gear and raced toward the Tactical Operations Center. They found Reeves there, blood dripping from a gash over his eye, his voice hoarse as he barked orders into multiple radios. A truck bomb had hit the front gate. It was a sophisticated, devastating device, the hallmark of Ahmad Shah's craftsmanship. 3 soldiers were dead and 7 more were wounded. Reeves looked at Sarah, and for the first time she saw a flicker of something like regret in his expression. He told her that Shaw had hit them because they hadn't hit him. He admitted it wasn't her fault, that she had followed her conscience, but the reality remained. 3 people were dead because the mission hadn't been completed. The names of the dead hit Sarah like physical blows. Martinez from Logistics, Davis from the 2nd Platoon, and a young private named Chen. Sarah looked at her partner, whose face had gone a ghostly, translucent white. It wasn't him. It was his younger cousin, a boy who had joined the service specifically to follow in Chen's footsteps. He had been 19 years old, standing guard at the gate when the bomb went off. He was dead because Sarah had hesitated. Chen made a sound that wasn't human, a low, guttural moan of agony, and sank against the wall. Sarah felt as if she had been hollowed out. The weight of her moral choice was now measured in the blood of her own people. Reeves didn't give them time to grieve. He told them that Shaw was celebrating the success of the attack at the same compound. The insurgent leader felt untouchable now, bolstered by his victory. Reeves ordered them back out. This time there would be no hesitation. He told Sarah that she would pull the trigger or he would find someone who would. They geared up in a silence so heavy it felt like they were underwater. Chen was a zombie, tears carving tracks through the dust on his face as he checked his gear. Sarah wanted to reach out to him to say something that could bridge the chasm of his loss, but the words didn't exist. Chen asked her in a whisper if sparing the girl had been worth his cousin's life. Sarah had no answer. She didn't know if being a good person mattered anymore in a place where every choice led to a grave. They were back on the ridge by dawn, establishing their hide in the same cluster of boulders. The world looked identical to the day before, but everything had changed. Chen's hands were trembling so violently he had to grip the spotting scope with both hands to keep it steady. Sarah's voice was like ice as she told him she needed him functional. She told him that Shaw was the one who killed his cousin, not their hesitation, and that they were there to make him pay for it. As the sun rose, painting the valley in shades of crimson, Ahmad Shaw walked out of the main building. He was alone this time, holding the same phone and the same detonator. He was smiling, likely recounting the details of the blast that had shattered Chen's family. Sarah called out the range and the environmental factors, her voice devoid of emotion. She found Shaw's head in her scope. This time there was no child, no blue dress, just a target that needed to be eliminated. Her finger found the trigger, but Chen's voice stopped her. He told her to look at Shaw's jacket, at the unnatural bulge around his torso. It was a suicide vest. If she hit him in the chest, the impact could detonate the explosives, leveling the compound and everyone in it. The stakes had shifted again. To ensure a clean kill without an explosion, she had to take a headshot. At 641 yards, with a shifting wind and a target the size of a grapefruit, it was a shot that few snipers would even attempt. If she missed, Shaw would live to build more bombs. If she missed, the sacrifice of the soldiers at the gate would be for nothing. Sarah took a slow, deep breath, feeling the cold air fill her lungs. She thought of the little girl in the blue dress, she thought of Martinez and Davis, and she thought of the 19-year-old boy who had died at a gate because his hero had chosen morality over the mission. She shifted her aim, the crosshairs settling on the bridge of Shaw's nose. She waited for the pause between heartbeats, the world falling away until there was only the glass and the target. She pulled the trigger. The rifle recoiled against her shoulder, a familiar, sharp kick. Through the scope, she watched the bullet's flight in a fraction of a second. Shaw's head snapped back as if he'd been hit by an invisible sledgehammer. He collapsed instantly, his body hitting the dirt like a bag of stones. The phone and the detonator tumbled harmlessly away. There was no explosion, just a sudden, absolute end. Chen's voice cracked as he confirmed the kill. In the compound below, chaos erupted as fighters scrambled toward the body, but Sarah remained motionless, her eye still pressed to the scope. She watched the man who had caused so much suffering lie still in the dust. She expected to feel a surge of triumph, a sense of justice or relief. Instead, she felt only a vast, cold emptiness. They exfiltrated the ridge, moving with a grim efficiency, and returned to the base. Reeves met them again, his expression unreadable as he acknowledged the confirmed kill. He called it a hell of a shot, and noted that it was exactly what he had asked for. Sarah replied that 3 men were still dead, and that her happiness didn't matter. Reeves turned to Chen and offered a brief, stilted apology for his cousin's death, adding that killing Shaw had likely saved dozens of lives. Chen's voice was hollow as he replied that it was something. The aftermath of the kill was a slow, agonizing erosion. The nightmares began almost immediately. Every time Sarah closed her eyes, she was back on the ridge. She saw the headshot in high-definition loops, but in the dreams, the faces changed. Sometimes it was Shaw, sometimes it was the insurgents from her past, but most often it was the little girl in the blue dress. In the nightmares, Sarah pulled the trigger while the girl was still in his arms, and she would wake up drenched in sweat, the taste of copper in her mouth. 4 nights after the mission, she found herself outside their quarters, disassembling and reassembling her rifle by the light of the moon. Chen joined her, unable to sleep as well. He was haunted by his cousin's face, wondering if the boy had suffered in his final moments. He told Sarah that the chaplain wanted him to talk about his grief, to process and move forward, but he found the advice hollow coming from someone who had never carried the weight of a life in their hands. He watched Sarah work on her rifle and told her that he was putting in for a transfer. The news hit her harder than the slap from Reeves. Chen was her partner, the only person who truly understood the cost of that week. He explained that he couldn't do it anymore, The waiting, the watching, the cold-blooded execution from a distance. It was eating him alive. He told her that she was built for this, that she had a strength he lacked, but that every time she pulled the trigger, a part of him died with the target. He was moving to a mechanized infantry unit in Kandahar, somewhere the combat felt more traditional and less personal. He apologized for leaving her without a spotter, but Sarah told him he was doing the right thing. He was saving himself. They sat together until the sun began to peek over the horizon, two people who had been forged in the same fire but had come out as different metals. When Chen left the following Monday, the goodbye was short and filled with the kind of promises to keep in touch that both knew would be broken by the sheer weight of their shared history. Sarah watched his convoy pull away, the dust swallowing the tail lights, and for the first time in her life she felt truly, utterly alone. Reeves found her later that day. He told her he had several experienced candidates for her new spotter, and that she could interview them whenever she was ready. He also mentioned that he had placed an official commendation in her file for her tactical restraint during the first encounter, admitting that her judgment had been superior to his own orders. It was a hollow victory. A piece of paper wouldn't stop the nightmares, and it wouldn't bring Chen's cousin back. Late that night, Sarah sat in the silence of her quarters and cried. She didn't cry for the mission or her career. She cried for the girl she had been before she ever picked up a rifle. She cried for the version of herself that believed being a good person was enough to survive a war. She had learned the hardest lesson the mountains had to offer, that sometimes the cost of morality is paid in the lives of those you were supposed to protect. She had crossed a line, not just between a student and a sniper, but between the person she wanted to be and the person the war required her to become. As she sat in the dark, she knew there was no path back to the girl from Montana. She was a sniper now, a ghost in the high places, and the weight of that truth was a burden she would carry for the rest of her life. The days that followed were a blur of routine and professional detachment. She interviewed the candidates Reeves had suggested, choosing a veteran named Miller who had a reputation for being steady and unimaginative. He was a good soldier, but he wasn't Chen. There was no shared language of silence between them, no unspoken understanding of the toll their work took. They went on missions, they sat in hides, and Sarah added more notches to her record. Her kills were clean, her technique was flawless, and the army called her a hero. But in the quiet moments when the wind howled through the base and the shadows grew long, Sarah would look at her hands. They didn't shake anymore. They were steady, cold, and efficient. She had become the perfect weapon, a tool of precision and lethality. She had saved lives, prevented attacks, and served her country with distinction. Yet as she stared out at the jagged peaks of the Hindu Kush, she couldn't help but feel that she had lost the very thing she was fighting to protect. The war hadn't just taken Ahmad Shah. It had taken her peace, her partnership, and her innocence. And as the sun set once more over the desert, Sarah Mitchell realized that in the world of the long-range kill, the person most often caught in the crosshairs was the one pulling the trigger. The transition to working with Miller was seamless in a technical sense, but spiritually it was like learning to breathe in a vacuum. Miller was a man of checklists and regulations. He didn't see the people in the scope as fathers or sons. He saw them as targets, data points to be neutralized. In a way, Sarah envied him. She envied the simplicity of his world. For her, the glass of the scope had become a window into a world of haunting complexity. Every time she looked through it, she saw the potential for a blue dress, the potential for a child's laughter to shatter the cold logic of the mission. She continued to perform, her reputation growing with every successful deployment. She was a legend at Viper, the girl from Montana who never missed. But the legend was a mask. Inside, she was a collection of fractured memories and the lingering scent of cordite. She thought of Chen often, wondering if the mechanized infantry in Kandahar gave him the distance he needed. She hoped he had found a way to live without the ghosts. One evening, while cleaning her rifle, a ritual that had become her only form of meditation, she found a small photograph tucked into the back of her logbook. It was a picture Chen had taken during their training, a candid shot of her laughing at something he'd said. She looked at the girl in the photo, at the genuine light in her eyes, and she barely recognized her. That girl was a stranger, a ghost from a different life. Sarah realized then that the most dangerous part of war wasn't the enemy's bullets or the improvised explosives. It was the slow, silent way it hollowed you out until you were nothing but a vessel for the mission. She put the photo away and reassembled the bolt of her rifle. The metallic click echoed in the small room, a sharp, definitive sound. She was a sniper. She was a soldier. She was effective. And in the brutal arithmetic of the desert, perhaps that was all she could afford to be. The morality of the first shot and the necessity of the second would always be in conflict within her, a permanent tension that would never be resolved. She would carry the weight of the girl in the blue dress and the weight of Chen's cousin for as long as she lived, two sides of a coin that had no value in the civilian world she had left behind. As she lay down to sleep, bracing herself for the inevitable return of the nightmares, Sarah Mitchell accepted her place in the world. She was the one who stood on the ridge, the one who watched from the shadows, the one who made the impossible choices so that others didn't have to. It was a lonely, terrible burden, but it was hers. And as the darkness of the barracks closed in, she closed her eyes, waiting for the silence to return, knowing that tomorrow the mountains would be waiting and she would be ready. The cycle of deployment and rest became the heartbeat of her existence. Each mission was a variation on a theme. The insertion, the long crawl, the hours of observation, and the final, decisive moment. She became a master of the environment, a phantom that the insurgents feared but could never find. Her tally of confirmed kills rose into the dozens, then higher. She was awarded medals that she kept at the bottom of her locker, never wearing them, feeling that the bronze and silver were poor substitutes for the things she had lost. Reeves eventually moved on, replaced by a new commander who viewed Sarah not as a problem child, but as a primary asset. He didn't ask her about her feelings or her conscience. He only asked about her range and her reliability. In the sterile environment of the new command, Sarah found a kind of grim stability. She did her job, and she did it better than anyone else. But the emptiness remained, a vast internal desert that mirrored the landscape she patrolled. She never wrote to Chen. She started several letters, trying to find a way to bridge the distance, but the words always felt inadequate. How do you tell someone that you're still haunted by the choice that killed their family? How do you explain that you're still pulling the trigger, even when it feels like you're killing yourself? Eventually, she stopped trying. The silence between them was the only honest thing left. Years later, long after she had left the service and returned to the big, open skies of Montana, Sarah would find herself standing on the edge of a field, watching the wind ripple through the grass. The mountains here were different, softer, greener, and full of life. But even in the peace of her home, the habits of the sniper remained. She would scan the tree line for movement, judge the wind by the swaying of the branches, and calculate the distance to the horizon. She had become a teacher, as she had once dreamed, but she was a different kind of teacher than the girl in the blue dress would have been. She taught with a quiet, somber intensity, a woman who knew the value of words and the weight of silence. Her students respected her, though they sensed a distance in her that they couldn't name. She was a pillar of the community, a veteran who had done her duty, but she remained a woman of shadows. Sometimes, in the quiet of a Montana evening, she would see a flash of blue in the corner of her eye. A child's jacket, a flower, a piece of ribbon. For a split second, she would be back on that ridge, the smell of dust and gun oil filling her nose, the weight of the rifle against her shoulder. She would see Ahmad Shah spinning his daughter, and she would feel the cold steel of the trigger. In those moments, she didn't think about the medals or the commendations. She thought about the line she had crossed and the person she had become to save the lives she could. She thought about the terrible cost of being effective and the enduring, silent weight of being good. And in the vast, quiet beauty of the world she had protected, Sarah Mitchell would finally find a measure of peace, a peace built not on forgetting, but on the strength it took to remember. The air in the office was thick with the scent of stale coffee and the hum of an aging air conditioner that seemed to be fighting a losing battle against the heat. Major Reeves sat behind his desk, his eyes weary, framed by the deep lines of a man who had seen too many good soldiers break under the pressure of the long war. He looked at the woman standing before him, her posture rigid, her eyes fixed on a point somewhere on the wall behind him. Sarah Mitchell wasn't the same person who had arrived in theater months ago. The softness was gone, replaced by a cold, sharpened edge that made even a veteran like Reeves feel a flicker of unease. He had offered her a new spotter, a fresh start after the disaster that had sidelined her previous partner, but Sarah had declined before he could even finish the sentence. "With all due respect, sir, I don't want a new spotter," Sarah said, her voice a flat, steady monotone. Reeves raised an eyebrow, leaning back in his creaking chair. The movement caused a stack of papers to shift, but he didn't look away from her. "You planning to run solo operations, Mitchell? Because that's a good way to get killed. We don't run lone wolves out here for a reason. You need eyes on your six and you need someone to help you range. It's basic protocol." "No, sir," she replied, finally shifting her gaze to meet his. "I'm planning to request a transfer of my own to where." She stopped, and Reeves saw something in her eyes that made him go still. It wasn't anger or even grief, but a profound, hollow determination. "Wherever you need the best shooter for the hardest targets, sir. I'm done with observation missions. I'm done with partners who can't handle the weight of the trigger. If I'm going to carry this burden, I'm going to carry it alone, and I'm going to make it count." Reeves sighed, a long, heavy sound. "That's a dangerous road, Mitchell. I've seen it before. Lone wolf snipers burn out faster than anyone else in the field. They lose perspective. They stop seeing targets as people and start seeing people as mere targets. It's a psychological drift that's hard to pull back from. I've watched it happen to better soldiers than you, people with decades of experience who thought they were bulletproof in the head. You start out thinking you're being efficient, but you end up losing your soul. Then I'll be the exception, sir," Sarah said, her voice never wavering. "Or I'll burn out and you'll send me home in a box or a straitjacket. Either way, I'm not partnering up again. Not after watching Chen break because of choices I made. Not after seeing what happens when the person next to you can't live with the reality of what we do. I can live with it. I have to." Reeves studied her for a long, silent moment. The silence stretched between them, punctuated only by the rhythmic thumping of the air conditioner. He saw the resolve in her, a terrifying kind of clarity that usually preceded either greatness or total self-destruction. He reached into a drawer and pulled out a heavy, unmarked folder he'd been carrying with him for weeks, almost as if he'd been waiting for this exact conversation. "There's a unit that might fit what you're describing," he said quietly. "Task Force Phantom. They handle the missions nobody else wants. High-value targets, deep insertions into hostile territory, maximum risk and maximum impact. They've been requesting a dedicated long-range specialist for 6 months, but everyone who interviews washes out. They can't handle the psychological pressure of the operational tempo." "I can handle it," Sarah said. "You say that now," Reeves countered, his voice dropping an octave. "But Phantom doesn't do observation and reporting. They don't sit in a hide for 3 days just to tell us which way a convoy is moving. They do targeted elimination. You'd be killing people every week, maybe every day, all alone in the dark with nothing but your rifle and your conscience. That's a special kind of hell, Mitchell. It's a meat grinder for the mind." "I'm already in hell, sir," Sarah replied, a ghost of a bitter smile touching her lips. "Might as well make it productive." Reeves didn't argue. He slid the folder across the desk. "I figured you'd say something like that. Those are the transfer papers. Sign them and you report to Phantom on Friday. But before you do, I need you to understand what you're volunteering for. This isn't like the missions you've been doing where the killing is a byproduct of the engagement. This is deliberate, calculated killing as a full-time job. No partners to share the weight. No missions where you come back without blood on your hands. Just you, the crosshairs, and the question of how many people you can eliminate before it kills something inside you that you can't ever get back." Sarah took the folder, her fingers steady as she flipped it open. She scanned the transfer orders, the classified designations, and the grim statistics buried in the fine print. "How many people have they gone through in the past 6 months?" she asked. "4 snipers," Reeves said. 2 washed out during the initial training phase. 1 completed 3 missions and requested an immediate psychiatric discharge. He's in a VA hospital now and probably won't ever be the same. The last one, he went missing after mission number 7. We still haven't found him." "Jesus," Sarah whispered, the first sign of emotion breaking through her armor. "Yeah," Reeves said. "So if you're having second thoughts, now is the time to speak up. I can find you a quiet desk job at Bagram. I can get you a ticket home. You've done enough, Mitchell. You don't owe this war anything else." "I'm not having second thoughts," Sarah said. She pulled a pen from her pocket and signed the papers with a hand that didn't shake. Not even a little. "When do I leave?" "You've got 4 days," Reeves told her. "Use them wisely. Rest. Write letters to your family. Make peace with whatever gods you believe in, because once you join Phantom, there are no half measures. You're all in until the war ends, or you do." Sarah spent those 4 days in a strange, echoing limbo. She felt like a ghost haunting her own life, moving through the base with a sense of detachment that was both frightening and liberating. She wrote a long, rambling letter to her mother, trying to explain the unexplainable. She wrote about the dust, the heat, and the strange beauty of the mountains. but she couldn't bring herself to write about the weight of the rifle or the faces in her scope. In the end, she explained nothing and everything at the same time, telling her mother she was safe and doing what she was meant to do. She went through her gear with a clinical precision, checking every seal, every spring, every lens. She found Chen's abandoned gear in the corner of their shared quarters, a pair of boots he'd never broken in, a compass with a cracked face. She donated it all to the younger soldiers, the ones who still had hope in their eyes and hadn't yet learned to fear the silence of the desert. She didn't want the reminders. She didn't want the ghosts. On her final afternoon, she went to the range. She brought crates of ammunition and fired until the barrel of her rifle was hot enough to burn, and her shoulder was a mass of bruised tissue. Each shot was a meditation, a way to drown out the voices in her head. With every crack of the rifle, she felt herself drifting further away from the girl who had grown up in the mountains of Montana and closer to the weapon the army wanted her to be. On the last night, as she was packing her final bag, a shadow fell across the doorway. It was Morrison. His arm was fully healed now, his physical therapy finished, and he was back to full combat duty with his SEAL team. He looked leaner, tougher, the kind of man who thrived in the chaos of battle. He didn't wait for an invitation. He just walked in and sat on the empty bunk that used to belong to Chen. "Heard you're transferring to Phantom," he said, his voice low. "News travels fast around here." "Bad news always does," Sarah replied without looking up from her rucksack. Morrison leaned back against the wall, his eyes searching her face. "I know some guys who worked with Phantom. They are a different breed, and none of them have a single nice thing to say about the experience. It changes a person, Sarah, not in the way a normal deployment does. It hollows you out. I didn't ask for nice," she said, finally looking at him. "I asked for purposeful. There's a difference." "There's also a difference between purposeful and suicidal, Montana," Morrison countered, using her old nickname. "Phantom missions have a 20% casualty rate. Think about that for a second. 20%. That means 1 in 5 operators doesn't come home. Those aren't odds, those are a death sentence on the installment plan. You're smarter than this." "Why are you here, Morrison?" she asked, her voice tight, "to talk me out of it." "Because if you are, you're wasting your breath." "No," he said, standing up. "You're too stubborn for that. I learned that the first day I met you. I'm here to remind you of something you seem to have forgotten." He stepped closer, his presence filling the small, cramped room. "Back at Operation Steel Thunder, you didn't pick up Hayes's rifle because you wanted to kill people. You didn't do it because you loved violence or because you wanted to be some high-speed operator. You did it because people needed you. Because good people were dying and you were the only one who could stop it." He paused, letting the words sink in. "That person, the one who shot to protect, not to destroy, that's who I want you to remember when you're out there. When you're alone in some god-forsaken desert killing strangers you've never met. Don't let Phantom take that away from you." "What if I can't remember her anymore?" Sarah asked, her voice barely a whisper. "What if she died somewhere between that firefight and this room?" "Then you find her again," Morrison said firmly. "Because the world doesn't need more killers, Sarah. It has plenty of those on both sides of this line. It needs protectors. You're one of the best I've ever seen. Don't lose that by turning yourself into a weapon instead of a shield." He left without waiting for a response, his footsteps echoing down the wooden hallway. Sarah sat on her bed for a long time, the silence of the room pressing in on her. She wondered if he was right. She wondered if she was making a terrible, irreversible mistake. Part of her wanted to run after him, to tell him he was right, to ask for a transfer somewhere safe where she wouldn't have to kill anymore. But the other part of her, the part that had been forged in the fire of Steel Thunder, knew there was no going back. When Friday morning came, she reported to the Phantom briefing room right on schedule. The facility was tucked away in a restricted corner of the base, surrounded by double-fenced wire and guarded by men who didn't wear name tapes. The unit commander was a colonel named Strand. He was 52 years old, with a face that looked like it had been carved from a block of granite. His eyes were the color of flint, and they had the 1,000-yard stare of a man who had seen the absolute worst that humanity had to offer and had stopped being surprised by it long ago. "Specialist Mitchell," Strand said, looking up from a file, "your reputation precedes you. Operation Steel Thunder. Sniper school records shattered. 14 confirmed kills in 2 weeks during your stint at Viper, including a 641-yard headshot on a high-value target wearing a suicide vest. That's an impressive resume for someone who started their career as a logistics specialist." "Thank you, sir," Sarah said, standing at attention. "Don't thank me yet," Strand said, his voice cold. "You haven't heard what I'm going to ask you to do." He stood up and walked to the front of the room, pulling up a series of photographs on a high-definition screen. They were portraits of men and women, some in military fatigues, some in traditional civilian clothes. Underneath each image was a target designation, a list of crimes, and a priority level. "These are our current priority targets," Strand explained. "Bomb makers, financiers, recruiters, weapons smugglers, and tactical commanders. These 15 people are directly responsible for the deaths of hundreds of Americans and thousands of locals. Your job, if you accept it, is to eliminate them one by one. Methodically. Permanently." Sarah studied the faces, memorizing the shapes of their jaws, the distance between their eyes. She looked for the humanity in them and found none, only the cold data of their roles in the insurgency. "Rules of engagement, sir?" she asked. "Weapons free on positive identification," Strand replied. "Minimize civilian casualties when possible, but mission completion takes priority. You will work alone. You will insert alone and you will exfiltrate alone. We provide the intelligence and the extraction coordinates, but the execution is entirely on you. The average mission duration is 72 hours. You'll deploy approximately twice per week. Any questions?" Sarah looked at a photo of a man smiling with a child on his lap. "How many of these targets have families?" Strand's expression didn't change. It was as if he'd been asked about the weather. "All of them." "Does that matter to you, specialist?" Sarah thought about the little girl in the blue dress she'd seen months ago. She thought about the father she'd hesitated to shoot and the 3 soldiers who had died because of that hesitation. She thought about Chen's broken spirit and the hollow feeling in her own chest. "No, sir," she said, her voice like iron. "It doesn't matter. I'm asking so I know what to expect, not because it changes the outcome." "Good answer," Strand said. "Sympathy is a luxury we can't afford in this unit. These people have chosen their path. We are simply providing the inevitable consequences of those choices." He closed the digital files and looked her in the eye. "You start Monday. Your first target is a financier named called Hassan. He's the man responsible for funding the network that killed your partner's cousin. Intelligence says he moves between 3 safe houses in Helmand province. We need him eliminated within the week. Can you do that?" Sarah felt something cold and hard settle into her chest. It was the final piece of the girl from Montana dying and the warrior taking her place completely. "Yes, sir," she said. "I can do that." The mission to eliminate called Hassan took 4 days of grueling, solitary work. Sarah tracked him through the scorched landscape of Helmand, moving like a shadow between the dunes and the ruined mud-brick villages. She learned his patterns, how he liked his tea at dawn, the way he paced when he was on the phone, the specific way he looked at his watch every 20 minutes. She identified his vulnerabilities, the small windows of time when his security detail was lax. On the 4th night, she took a position on a crumbling rooftop 800 yards from his bedroom window. She laid there for 14 hours, motionless, her breathing slow and rhythmic. She didn't eat. She didn't sleep. She simply waited. When Hassan finally appeared at 11 o'clock that night, he was talking on a satellite phone, gesturing with his free hand, completely unaware that death was watching him through a piece of glass. Sarah found him in the scope, dialed in the windage, and squeezed the trigger. It was a clean kill. Hassan dropped where he stood, the phone skittering across the floor. Sarah didn't wait to see the guards rush into the room. She was already packing her gear, moving with a practiced, mechanical efficiency. She felt nothing. No triumph, no guilt, no relief. Just the quiet satisfaction of a job completed. The second target fell 3 days later. He was a recruiter who specialized in radicalizing teenagers, turning children into weapons of war. Sarah shot him through a car window at 600 yards while he was driving to a meeting. The vehicle veered off the road and burst into flames. By the time the first responders arrived, Sarah was miles away, already preparing for the next insertion. The 3rd target followed, then the 4th, then the 5th. By the end of her first month with Task Force Phantom, Sarah had killed 11 people. By the end of her 2nd month, the number had risen to 23. The nightmares that had plagued her after Steel Thunder finally stopped, not because she had found peace, but because she was too exhausted to dream. The guilt faded because she was too numb to feel it. She became exactly what Colonel Strand needed, a perfect weapon, emotionless and efficient, killing on command without question or hesitation. Morrison's warning echoed in her memory sometimes, usually late at night when the silence was too loud. He had told her she was a protector, not a destroyer, but it was hard to remember protection when destruction was the only thing she did. She had become Shadow 7, a call sign on a radio, a ghost in the desert. The person named Sarah Mitchell felt like someone she had read about in a book a long time ago. Then came the mission that changed everything. The target was Rashid al-Zahrani, a Saudi national suspected of coordinating suicide bombings across 3 provinces. The intelligence packet was thick with evidence of his cruelty, estimated responsibility for 87 coalition deaths and over 200 Afghan civilian casualties. He was a high-value target of the highest order. The command was simple: eliminate on sight. Sarah tracked him to a heavily fortified compound on the outskirts of Kandahar. She spent 2 days establishing a hide site in the hills overlooking the walls, her rifle resting on a custom-built bipod. She had clear sight lines to the main courtyard and the residential buildings. At dawn on the 3rd day, al-Zahrani finally emerged. She had the perfect shot. 700 yards, no wind, clear background. It was a textbook execution waiting to happen. Her finger took up the slack on the trigger, her eye locked onto the center of his chest. But then she noticed something that wasn't in the briefing. Al-Zahrani wasn't carrying a weapon or a radio. He was carrying a worn medical bag. He didn't walk toward a vehicle or a meeting with armed men. Instead, he walked toward a small, nondescript building that the intelligence packet had marked as an abandoned storage shed. Except it wasn't abandoned. As Sarah watched through the high-powered glass of her scope, people began to emerge from the shadows of the surrounding buildings. They were sick people, injured people. There were children with obvious medical problems, limping or being carried by their parents. Al-Zahrani didn't look like a terrorist coordinator. He looked like a man who was exhausted. His shoulders slumped as he began to greet the crowd. He knelt down to examine a little girl's arm, his hands moving with a gentleness that Sarah hadn't seen in months. He wasn't planning an attack. He was running a clinic. Sarah's finger froze. The conflict in her mind was sudden and violent. The file said he was a monster. The file said he was responsible for the deaths of soldiers just like her. But the man in her scope was treating an infected wound with care and concern. She lowered her rifle slightly and pulled out her radio. "Phantom Actual, this is Shadow 7. I need confirmation on target identity." "Over." Strand's voice crackled back almost instantly, sounding like gravel over the airwaves. "Shadow 7, target is confirmed. Rashid al-Zahrani, eliminate on sight. Why haven't you taken the shot?" "Over. Actual target is currently providing medical treatment to civilians," Sarah reported, her voice steady despite the hammering of her heart. "There are children present. He is operating what appears to be a free clinic. Request updated intelligence before proceeding." "Over." There was a long, heavy pause on the other end. Sarah watched as al-Zahrani handed a small bottle of medicine to a weeping mother. He looked up and smiled at the child, a genuine, warm expression that made Sarah's stomach turn. Strand's voice came back, colder than before. "Shadow 7, your job is not to interpret intelligence or play doctor. Your job is to eliminate the target. We have confirmed his identity and his involvement in multiple bombings. The clinic is a front. Proceed with the mission. That is a direct order." "Over." Sarah looked back through the scope. She watched al-Zahrani bandage the arm of a little boy who couldn't have been more than 6 years old. She saw the way the man's hands moved, the practiced, healing touch of a physician, not the callous movements of a killer. She realized in that moment that she was being asked to commit a murder, not a tactical elimination. She realized something else, too. She had become exactly what Morrison had warned her against. She had become a weapon that took orders without question. She had lost the girl who valued restraint over results. She had become Shadow 7, a designation instead of a person. If she pulled this trigger, Sarah Mitchell would be gone forever. "Phantom Actual, this is Shadow 7, she said, her voice clear and firm. "I am aborting the mission. Target does not match the threat profile provided in the briefing. I need third-party verification before I proceed." "Over." Shadow 7, Strand's voice was a snarl now. "You are ordered to complete the mission immediately or face court-martial for disobeying direct orders in a combat zone. You pull that trigger now or your career is over. Do you copy?" Sarah didn't answer. She set down the radio, reached out, and slowly began to dismantle her rifle. She felt a strange sense of peace wash over her, a lightness she hadn't felt since before Steel Thunder. She packed her gear, collapsed her bipod, and crawled out of the hide site. She walked away from the compound, away from the mission, and away from the life she had been building for herself in the shadows. The arrest happened 6 hours later at the extraction point. She didn't put up a fight. A squad of military police was waiting for her, and Colonel Strand was standing behind them, his face a mask of fury. "Specialist Mitchell," he said as they zip-tied her hands behind her back. "You are under arrest for failure to obey a direct order during combat operations. You will be confined to quarters pending court-martial proceedings. Do you have anything to say for yourself?" Sarah looked him in the eye, her head held high. "No, sir. You just destroyed your life," Mitchell, Strand hissed as they led her toward the transport vehicle. "Everything you've accomplished, every sacrifice you've made, it's all gone because you suddenly developed a conscience about killing a terrorist." "He wasn't a terrorist, sir," Sarah said quietly. "He was a doctor who happened to have the same name as a terrorist, and I wasn't willing to kill him without being sure." "The intelligence was solid," Strand shouted. "The intelligence was wrong," Sarah replied. "And I'd rather face 20 years in prison than live with the fact that I murdered an innocent man for the sake of your mission completion statistics." They confined her to a small, windowless cell at Bagram Airfield. For 2 weeks, she saw no one but the guards who brought her food. There was no television, no books, no communication with the outside world. She sat in the silence and waited, wondering if she had thrown everything away for nothing. She thought about the little girl in the clinic and wondered if she was still alive. She thought about her mother and the letter she'd sent. On the 14th day, the heavy steel door of her cell groaned open. It wasn't a guard. It was Lieutenant Hayes. He looked different than he had in the mountains. Older, his face thinner, his movements stiff from the lingering effects of his injuries. But his eyes were as sharp as ever. "Montana," he said, leaning against the doorframe, "you look like hell." "Feel worse, sir," Sarah said, standing up. "What are you doing here? Did they send you to talk some sense into me?" "I'm here to testify at your court-martial," Hayes said. "They're charging you with everything they can think of. Disobeying orders, failure to complete a combat mission, conduct unbecoming. If the board goes for the maximum, you're looking at 5 years in Leavenworth." Sarah's stomach dropped. 5 years. It felt like a lifetime. "Yeah," Hayes said, seeing her reaction, "unless someone speaks on your behalf. So I flew halfway around the world to tell them a story. I'm going to tell them about Operation Steel Thunder. I'm going to tell them about a logistics specialist who picked up my rifle when I was bleeding out and saved 12 lives without a second thought. I'm going to tell them about a soldier who made an impossible hostage rescue shot because it was the right thing to do, even when it was the hardest thing she'd ever faced." He sat down on the narrow bench across from her. "I also did some digging on Rashid al-Zahrani. You were right, Sarah. He's not the terrorist. He's a doctor who runs free clinics for the poor in Kandahar. His cousin is the one coordinating the bombings. They have the same last name and they both operate in the same province. Intelligence got them confused because they were lazy. If you'd taken that shot, you would have killed a man who spends his life saving people. It would have been a catastrophe." Sarah felt tears burning behind her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. "So I made the right call. You made the only call a decent human being could make," Hayes said. "Unfortunately, the military doesn't always reward decency. They reward obedience, and you broke the chain of command. But I'm not going to let them bury you for it. I owe you my life, Montana. The least I can do is try to save yours." The court-martial convened 3 days later in a stark, wood-paneled room. Sarah stood at attention while the charges were read, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. Colonel Strand testified first. He was clinical, damning, and professional. He detailed her refusal to follow a lawful order, emphasized the importance of the mission, and painted her as a liability who couldn't be trusted in a high-pressure environment. He made it sound like she had betrayed every soldier she'd ever served with. Then Hayes took the stand. He didn't talk about regulations or mission parameters. He talked about the soul of a soldier. He told the board about the day in the mountains when everything went wrong. He described Sarah's courage and her absolute commitment to the people around her. Then he did something no one expected. He talked about his own failures. He talked about the times he had followed orders without question and the people who had died because of it. He talked about the weight of killing the wrong person and how that weight never, ever goes away. "Gentlemen," Hayes concluded, looking each member of the board in the eye, "the question isn't whether Specialist Mitchell disobeyed an order. We know she did. The question is, do we want an army of robots who follow commands without thought, or do we want an army of warriors who have the courage to say no when the orders are wrong?" Sarah Mitchell represents the latter. If we punish her for having a moral compass, we are telling every soldier in this army that their conscience is a liability. I pray you choose wisdom over precedent. The board deliberated for 6 hours. Sarah waited in a small side room, her hands folded in her lap. When they finally called her back in, the lead officer stood and read the verdict. Specialist Sarah Mitchell, this board finds you guilty of failure to obey a direct order in a combat zone. However, in light of the testimony regarding the faulty intelligence and your exemplary service record, we are reducing the charge to a non-judicial punishment. You will receive a formal reprimand, a reduction in rank to private, and immediate reassignment to a non-combat position. This court-martial is concluded. Sarah's knees went weak with relief. She wasn't going to prison. She wasn't getting a dishonorable discharge. She had a chance to start over. Hayes found her outside the courtroom afterward. Before he could say a word, she threw her arms around him. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for saving me." "You saved me first, Montana," he said, patting her shoulder. "I was just returning the favor." He pulled back and studied her face. "What will you do now?" "They're reassigning you stateside, probably back to logistics at some quiet post." Sarah thought about the girl from Montana who had wanted to be a teacher. She thought about the sniper who had killed 34 people. She thought about the soldier who had finally found the strength to say no. "I think I'm done being a weapon, sir," she said. Morrison was right. The world needs protectors. Maybe I go back to logistics. Maybe I teach new soldiers how to do the job the right way. Maybe I find a way to serve that doesn't involve taking a life. Hayes smiled. "Sounds like you found yourself again." "Yeah," Sarah said. "I think maybe I have." Sarah Mitchell returned to the United States 3 weeks later. She landed at Dover Air Force Base on a cold, gray November morning that reminded her of the winters back home. She was processed out of combat duty and reassigned to Fort Carson in Colorado. Her new job was training logistics specialists, teaching teenagers how to properly load magazines, how to manage supply chains, and how to count every single bullet. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't heroic. Most of the time, it was tedious and frustrating. But it was honest work, and for the first time in a year, she could look at herself in the mirror without flinching. She lived in a small apartment off base, filled it with books, and started taking night classes in education. 6 months into her assignment, she received a letter in the mail. The return address was from Coronado, California. It was from Morrison. His SEAL team had rotated back to the States, and he was working as an instructor for the BUDS program. The letter was short and written in his jagged, familiar handwriting. "Montana, heard about the court-martial," it read. "Heard you chose your conscience over your career. Just wanted to say I'm proud of you for remembering who you are. The world needs more people like you. Stay strong, Morrison." She kept that letter in her uniform pocket, right over her heart, next to the one from her mother. Sarah Mitchell would never be a household name. Her face wouldn't be on the news, and her story wouldn't be told in history books. The Bronze Star with Valor she had earned at Operation Steel Thunder sat in a dusty drawer in her mother's house, unworn and unmentioned. The 34 people she had killed remained faceless names in classified mission reports, ghosts that would haunt her for the rest of her life. But she had learned the hardest lesson war had to teach. She had learned that true strength isn't measured in confirmed kills or the ability to endure suffering. It's measured in the courage to stay human when the world demands you become a monster. It's measured in the choice to protect rather than destroy, even when destruction is the easier path. She was no longer the girl who carried ammunition for others. She was no longer the sniper who never missed. She was Sarah Mitchell, a woman who had been shattered by war and had put herself back together, piece by piece, into something stronger than she had been before. She was a teacher, a soldier, and a protector. And as she stood on the range at Fort Carson, watching a new recruit struggle with a jammed rifle, she leaned down and showed him how to fix it with a steady, patient hand. She wasn't just teaching him how to use a weapon. She was teaching him how to be a soldier. And for Sarah, that was finally enough.